ministerial code. That's the right approach, it's the professional approach, and that's how we'll restore integrity and accountability into government overall, is by making sure that when situations like this arise, we deal with them promptly, we deal with them professionally, and that's what we're doing in this case.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the Prime Minister must show leadership and sack Mr Zahawi.
Everybody knows it's wrong. He clearly isn't going to resign, and so the Prime Minister needs to show some leadership. This is a test of the Prime Minister. He promised us, his first words, integrity and accountability. Well, if those words mean anything, the Prime Minister should sack him, and sack him today, and show some leadership. Because if he doesn't, it's just going to be further evidence, I think, for the British public as to just how weak this Prime Minister really is.
Thousands of ambulance workers are striking for the third time in 5 weeks. Unison and GMB union members across England and Wales have walked out, along with staff at 2 hospital trusts in Liverpool. Further industrial action is planned in the coming weeks by nurses and other NHS workers. Union leaders are calling for fair pay, accusing the government of not wanting to find a resolution. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the action is hugely disappointing and warned patients of disruption. Households with smart meters could receive discounts if they cut their energy use today during peak times. After successful trials, National Grid is launching its demand flexibility scheme between 5 and 6 p.m. 26 suppliers are signed up to the initiative. It's also asked 3 coal plants to begin warming up as a contingency, with forecasters predicting supplies could be squeezed during today's cold snap. Meanwhile, the energy regulator is launching a review of the checks and balance companies use to place customers on prepayment meters. Ofgem is threatening legal action if they don't take due care in the process. The chief executive, Jonathan Brearley, says the number of people forced onto prepayment meters is extremely high, and vulnerable customers shouldn't be left in the dark and cold during winter.
From April, households on median disposable income will spend 10% of that on their energy bills, and those relying on the state pension will spend 29%. That is a truly extraordinary part of our household budgets. And even with the energy price guarantee and energy bills discount scheme, I know that the scale of the challenge for many people out there remains enormous.
The chair of the BBC has asked for a scrutiny panel to look at potential conflicts of interest over his links with Boris Johnson. There are reports Richard Sharp was involved in securing a loan of up to £800,000 for the then Prime Minister. Mr Sharp insists he didn't make a loan or arrange any financing for Mr Johnson, but that he only made an introduction to a guarantor. It comes as the former Prime Minister made a surprise visit to Ukraine. Boris Johnson, who met President Zelensky in the capital Kyiv, said Britain would stick by the country for as long as it takes. The pair also walked the streets of war-torn Bucha, where hundreds of people were killed during Russian attacks. Dozens of firefighters are tackling a blaze in Edinburgh. Scottish Fire and Rescue were called to the Jenners building at around 11:30 this morning, with 10 fire trucks in attendance. No casualties have been reported, but some streets surrounding the former department store have been cordoned off. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, back to Patrick.
OK, people, let's get stuck in, because in a few moments we'll get the very latest as the Prime Minister has ordered that independent investigation into the tax affairs of the Conservative Party chairman Nadeem Zahawi. But first, I wanted to ask, are we becoming a nation of households who are increasingly dependent on the state? Are we benefits Britain? Are we lazy? Are we scroungers? A new study has found that the number of Brits who receive more in benefits and state help than they pay in tax has reached a record high. Analysis from the think tank Civitas shows that around 54% of households that get more from the government than they contribute. That's around 36 million people, supposedly. The findings are based on the most recent official data from 2020 to 2021 and reflect a huge support put in place by ministers to keep the country going during lockdown. There is a lot to unpack here. I am rather simplistically asking you, ladies and gentlemen at home, GBViews at gbnews.uk, do you think that we are a nation of people on the take? Are there too many people on the take? Here to give, no doubt, a more nuanced and educated view than that is Tim Knox, who's the co-author of the Civitas report and also the former director of the Centre for Policy Studies. Very grateful to say he joins me now. Thank you very much for being on the show. OK, so when people look at this report, I think a lot of people do jump to the conclusion that maybe we have become a nation of scroungers or that people want something for nothing. Your views?
I prefer to place the blame for this staggering figure at the foot of the government, of the state. If you're effectively encouraged to not work, then it's not no surprise that many people do take that decision. It is absolutely staggering that over half of people now receive more from the state than they pay in tax. And worryingly, it is a proportion which has been going up very quickly. It's not just the impact of the pandemic, but it's been going up since the turn of the century. And the real question is, for how much longer can we see it go up?
So in your view, right now, I'm hoping you might be able to explain this a bit for me and for our viewers and our listeners. We have created a situation where it is very easy to sit around, do nothing and stick your hand out. Have we?
In part, yes, but I don't think we should blame the individuals concerned. It is
no, I get what you mean. It's just that situation, it should not exist. We shouldn't necessarily give people that opportunity. I understand that, but I suppose the fact is some people are taking it. And you said it's not to do with COVID, because that was going to be my next question, which is, am I looking at figures here about whopping great big handouts that people needed during coronavirus just to be able to afford food? But it's not that, in your view.
Sorry, I did say it's not only COVID, but COVID did have a very big impact, particularly in terms of the reduced VAT that we paid into the state as we all shopped far less, as we all locked up and didn't go shopping. Then, so equally, we did not pay very much VAT. Obviously, there were also increases to universal credit, which went up, and also people were only on 80% of their incomes. Having said that, there were items like the furlough payments, which are not included in these numbers. The ONS, the government body responsible for the data, decided to make the furlough payments technically the same as salary payments. And their reasoning was that the money was given to employers who then paid the money on to their employees.
Okay.
Even more worryingly, it is about to get worse. There have been so many additional COVID measures and energy measures going on that I suspect that in the next year and the following one, then that 54% will be even higher.
I understand that you are not a psychologist. However, my big concern is that we have got a big psychological issue here now. We've created a situation, as you've indicated there, where people can be very comfortable being much more reliant on the state than they want to put into the state, and that might be quite hard to reverse. You're saying that you fear that might get worse. Does Britain have a psychological problem when it comes to money?
I think it's a cultural problem more than a psychological one, and I think it is undeniably true that if in certain circumstances, certain individuals will be able to have a relatively comfortable life, staying at home with all the wonderful technological toys that they have to play with, and will be able to get by perfectly all right if they've got a good...
I get that. The old Lee Anderson adage that, you know, a lot of people do spend a lot of money on booze, fags and Sky Telly, and I do understand that. Just very quickly, very finally, on this one right now, we need rich people, do we not? Because clearly rich people are doing a huge amount of the heavy lifting. Should we stop demonising the rich?
Definitely. They pay nearly 60, 70, 80% of all taxes. It can't go on. The politicians seem to expect them just to pay for everything.
Just to keep paying for everything?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Well, look, thank you very much, and thank you very much for dishing out this wonderful report as well. Very informative. I say wonderful, it's actually quite bleak reading, but it's good stuff nonetheless. Thank you very, very much. As, of course, Tim Knox, who's the co-author of the Civitas report into, well, essentially the fact that, well, we've created a situation, clearly, where it is worthwhile for people to not necessarily sit around and do nothing, but certainly take a lot more from the state than they are putting in. Do you know, at the course of this show, I'm going to be unpacking a few different angles on that, because I want to know whether or not it's got stuff to do with an ageing population, for example. It may well do. Whether or not there is that COVID backlog. Are we suffering from long COVID financially? We know we all are, because we've had to dish out a load of cash because we had the lockdowns thing. I also am quite keen to unpack what our immigration level is doing to this. If people are coming into this country on the lower economic spectrum, as it were, surely those people are taking more from the state than they are putting into it. How does that work? Does that burst the bubble of the fact that mass immigration is a good thing? Lots to unpack there. Keep your emails coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I am asking rather simplistically, do you think too many people here are on the take? Get those emails in. I'll go to those shortly. But right now, I'm going to go because the Prime Minister has ordered this independent investigation into the tax affairs of the Conservative Party chairman Nadeem Zahawi. It comes after the revelations that Mr Zahawi paid a penalty to HMRC over previously unpaid tax whilst he was Chancellor, which is poetically ironic, isn't it? As part of a multi-million-pound dispute. He says he's got nothing to hide and that he'd acted properly throughout. Rishi Sunak said this morning there were questions that needed answering amid growing calls for Mr Zahawi to quit.
Integrity and accountability is really important to me, and clearly in this case there are questions that need answering, and that's why I've asked our independent advisor to get to the bottom of everything, to investigate the matter fully and establish all the facts and provide advice to me on Nadeem Zahawi's compliance with the ministerial code. I'm pleased that Nadeem Zahawi has agreed with that approach and has agreed to fully cooperate with that investigation.
You can decide whether Mr Zahawi stays or goes. Why don't you ask him to stand down?
Well, I think it's important that we do these things professionally. Integrity and accountability is really important to me, but it's also important that we do these things properly, and that's why the independent advisor has been asked to fully investigate this matter and provide advice to me on Nadeem Zahawi's compliance with the ministerial code. And on the basis of that, we'll decide on the appropriate next steps. But Nadeem Zahawi has agreed to fully cooperate with that investigation.
Shouldn't he stand aside from his party chairman role while this investigation continues?
As is long-standing practice, he will continue to play the role that he does. But it is important that we answer these questions, we get to the bottom of things, establish the facts. That's important to me. I think integrity and accountability is paramount in government, and I want to do these things professionally, which is why I've asked the independent advisor to fully look at this matter and provide advice to me.
But doesn't he owe the public more than...
OK, right, so Rishi Sunak there essentially saying he's palmed it off on independent inquiry. That, of course, buys the Tory party a bit of time. It buys Nadeem Zahawi a little bit of time. Nadeem Zahawi, for his part in it, is going, hey, all right, honest mistake. I've paid my dues. Let's wait and see what this independent inquiry has to say. Keir Starmer, in an interesting position for a bloke who used to be head of the CPS, is essentially asking for a bloke to be sacked before he's technically been proved of any guilt, which I think is a fascinating approach from a man who, you know, is all about justice, supposedly. But strap yourselves in, because in the next half hour or so, probably about 15 minutes now, the Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner will speak in the House of Commons. She's demanding answers about the situation, but a man with some of those answers is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster for us right now. Darren, thank you very much. OK, so this independent inquiry buys them a bit of time, does it?
Yeah, frankly, it does, is the bottom line. This is the new number 10 ethics advisor going to look into all of this. I think what's troubling for Nadeem Zahawi is that he's repeatedly suggested over the last couple of years or so, since these investigations into his tax affairs begun, that there was nothing to see here, and yet it has obviously emerged in the last couple of days or so that there's an awful lot to see, that when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he did finally sort out this tax disagreement with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. We think including the penalty, and there was a penalty paid up to the tune of around 5 million quid, so it's not exactly peanuts. Why is that also troublesome? Well, because of course when you're Chancellor of the Exchequer, you are effectively in charge of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. You are effectively the leader of that institution as well, as it falls under the Treasury's remits, which makes it all, frankly, more than a little awkward. And that is why I think Nadhim Zahawi's job, frankly, is hanging by a thread, if you like, as chairman of the Conservative Party. Now, there are questions for the Prime Minister too. What did he know and when about all of this? But in the end, I think this is politically just very, very difficult. And yes, this investigation will be carried out. It will allow Nadhim Zahawi to say that there is an investigation. He can't make any comment on it. But politically, it doesn't look great, does it? That effectively the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, a senior cabinet minister, wasn't paying the right amount of tax. And in the end, that he doesn't seem to be as open and transparent, something the Prime Minister's talked about, which will define his premiership. He's not been as open and transparent as people would have liked, if you like, Patrick.
Look, Darren, thank you very, very much. Bit short and sweet from us because we're going to go shortly anyway to the House of Commons, so we'll get the very latest on that. But no doubt I will talk to you again very soon. Expertly summarised there by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster. Look, Rishi Sunak's in a bit of a tricky situation here, as is indeed Nadhim Zahawi, who potentially, in the worst-case scenario for a good old Nadhim, who, of course, denies any wrongdoing, is on the brink of being skint and unemployed, isn't he? Which is not a particularly great thing, even if you are a rather wealthy man at the moment. But we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. Loads to come your way, including, yes, we'll be lobbing ourselves over, crucially, to the House of Commons in a matter of moments, fingers crossed, because we'll be hearing from Angela Rayner, Deputy Labour leader, as she sticks the knife into Nadhim and Rishi Sunak. What happened to innocent until proven guilty, eh? But you are with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, thousands of ambulance workers have staged a strike in a dispute over pay. I'll be speaking to the leader of the Unite union to find out just how long his members are prepared to go on with their action. I went away for a week, and I come back, and the news agenda is exactly the same. I'm back in a tick. Good grief.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Just a gentle reminder that very shortly we're going live to House of Commons to hear Angela Rayner give her thoughts about the Nadeem Zahawi situation. No doubt, probably anyway, going to call for him to get sacked, but we'll have a little look and a listen to that shortly. Before that, thousands of ambulance workers have staged a fresh strike across England and Wales in a dispute over pay and staffing. Members of the Unison, Unite and GMB union held a third strike in 5 weeks. They were joined by NHS colleagues at 2 hospital trusts in Liverpool. We're going to go and get some of the detail from the scene now with our GB News national reporter, Paul Hawkins, before we talk to a union representative to get the lowdown from his point of view. Paul joins us now. There you are, Paul, from a London Ambulance Service HQ. Paul, thank you very much. What's the atmosphere like?
I'd say it's pretty upbeat, determined but upbeat. In fact, they're busting out a few tunes over here, as they have been doing for a number of hours. We've had Dexy's Midnight Runners, a bit of Shania Twain, some Diana Ross earlier, and a bit of 2 Unlimited's There's No Limit. Although the government would say, I'll tell you what, with all these horns and whistles, it's a bit like the World Cup and all the big flags, although different kind of striker, obviously. Although not that they would want to be called that, they want to get in their ambulances and do their job, but they're saying we don't want to do it because we're not getting paid enough. And at the moment, the government's offering us 4% this year. They're not talking about a pay rise next year, or they want to move the conversation on to next year, but we want to keep it focused on this year, and we want closer to 10%. That's the message from GMB, Unite and Unison. This picket line is Unison. The other message is that, frankly, they feel that the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, isn't doing enough of a good enough job, and they want to get Rishi Sunak involved, and they also want to get the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, involved, because according to Unison, they say he's pulling the purse strings in the Treasury. So that's kind of the politics of it. In terms of how the actual staff that go out on those emergency calls, how they're feeling, here's what 2 emergency medical technicians, also known as EMTs, here's what they go through on the day-to-day of the job.
It was just before Christmas, we took a patient into a hospital in North London. We got in there at just gone 4, we unloaded at 8:30. So we was 4.5 hours standing in a corridor with a patient. That's not fair. It's not fair on us, and it's not fair on our patients. We do our job. We have to do our job. It's a job that we was trained for. But it's not right. It's not right that you can just use people like that. You know, like just we've got skilled people just standing in corridors or waiting on the back of ambulances. That's not right. It's not.
Members of the public calling us when we're not really needed.
Yeah.
I believe the members of the public should be sensitized for them to know that they should only call us for life-threatening situations.
Yeah.
I've been to a patient before who called us just only to apply cream to an amputated leg.
Yeah, quite remarkable what that last EMT had to say, that he was called to a woman who needed cream put on her leg. So I guess the point there is that even when there's no industrial action on, we as the members of the public have to take some responsibility when we decide to pick up the phone and dial 999. But the general point there that both men were making is that this is as much about conditions as it is about pay, that these guys feel that because of the ongoing recruitment crisis has been going on for years, they've been given more and more and more to do. They're having to work more overtime, but their pay hasn't been going up. And so effectively they're doing more for less when they do such a crucial job, and that they're not giving the level of service that they want to the general public. The government, on the other hand, say, we understand that and we're willing to offer you 4% this year. Let's talk about next year. But there isn't any more money available. One paramedic said to me earlier, yeah, but they always find the money from somewhere when they need to.
Paul, thank you very, very much. Interesting, fascinating report, actually, listening to those 2 people there. Paul Hawkins there is live from the scene, the London Ambulance HQ. Now, look, very shortly, hopefully anyway, we're going to be speaking to a union representative. Some, I think, interesting questions to be put to these people. So inflation is supposedly set to fall. So does the pay argument, anyway, of needing this whopping great big pay rise way above inflation, or in line with inflation, I should say, really, they give them some credit, does that argument significantly diminish in, I don't know, 6 months' time when inflation has dropped, if indeed it does drop? Also, as well, this business of ambulances being stacked up outside hospitals, it must be incredibly frustrating for people who go on shift to drive an ambulance to save lives, and they end up with one person in the back of the ambulance and they're waiting outside a hospital 4 hours. Yeah, OK, fine, but is this what NHS managers are paid to try to sort, the logistics of it? It's not Steve Barclay's fault inherently, is it? He's not out there with a big road closed sign in front of the A&E departments, is he? Is this not what people who are on 200 grand a year working in the NHS that we're paying for? Is it not part of their job to do that? I mean, they have got the money, haven't they, for the old directors of lived experience and the diversity officers? I mean, at what point is this all the government's fault? But talking of being far too reliant on the state, I was asking you at the top of the show whether or not you feel as though too many people in Britain are on the take, because it's turned out that there's a report that's been emerged that for the first time, apparently, for the first time, more people, more than 50%, mathematicians you and I, aren't we, more than 50% of people are indeed now taking more from the state than they put in. Now, there can be a whole host of reasons for this, plenty of them not sinister at all, unfortunate, ageing population, for example, but I was asking you what you thought about it, and Helen has been on. Helen says, people can live too well on benefits. Why would they work? Maybe don't receive a lot of money, but have nothing to pay out, no rent to pay, very little council tax and water rates, etc., cost of living payments. Essentially, I think, just reading between the lines of what Helen was saying there anyway, that maybe our benefit system is too much of an incentive to not go to work. I imagine there'll be people now watching this who are on benefits who would massively disagree. Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, a range of views. But yes, good. Joining me now is the National Officer at the Unite the Union. It's Oné Kassab, who's going to talk to me a bit about those ambulance strikes that we were referring to earlier on. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Right, OK, so another walkout, more stress for various people, namely patients, I suppose, as well. What are ambulance workers, on average, earning now, and what have they been offered?
As far as the offer is concerned, there's been no offer since the dispute started. Ambulance workers, when they start work, can earn around sort of £27,500 as unqualified paramedics. But all that's happened from the government is that we've had talks about possible pay resolutions, possible lump sums, possibly bringing forward the date for 2023, but we've had no proposal. That's the reality. That's why the strikes are taking place. There is no proposal from the government.
Do you think the government's looking at the popularity ratings now? This time last month, you guys, ambulance workers going on strike, had a 63% approval rating in the polls. Now you're down to 52%. Do you think that the government thinks if they just wait it out, the public will turn against you?
I think it would be very unfortunate if that's what they were doing. And there was a YouGov poll on Friday last week that said 3 in 5 of people diagnosed with a condition were in support of NHS workers taking action. So I think the support is still there. And it would be unfortunate if that's the line that the government are taking, because we are clear, we are ready at any point to sit down and talk and resolve this situation.
Can I ask, Oné, sorry to interrupt, it's just we are a bit pressed for time. There's a lot to get through. I appreciate your answers there. I'm not trying to just run rush all over you. But what is it that you guys actually want? Because I'm looking at the predictions for inflation, for example. They're set to, depending on what you read, potentially fall quite rapidly, which means the cost of living crisis will be diminished, therefore weakening your case for a whopping great big pay rise.
Well, not such a whopping great pay rise, but don't forget this dispute is about the April 2022 pay awards. So we look at what inflation was running at during that period. And look, I know you said whopping great pay rise, and what we're looking for. We are willing to negotiate. We are willing to compromise. We look at the RPI measure of inflation, which is now at about 13.4%. But I emphasise we are willing to negotiate and compromise, but there have been no direct pay talks with the government to date.
Well, yeah, my thinking is, let's say they offer you around the 4% mark, which has been rumoured, and let's say that in about 6 months' time inflation is around 4%, you would want a pay rise in line with inflation, wouldn't you? Which is what they've offered you.
Well, look, as I said, we've got to resolve 2022. We've got to have pay talks to resolve that. And what we have reiterated time and time again is that if there is an offer from the government, providing it's a sensible, reasonable offer, we will put that to our members. The strike action doesn't have to happen, providing the government's willing to negotiate.
OK, very finally, I know, this is a point of confusion for me. I'm hoping you're able to clear this up. So when we've got the big queues in terms of conditions now, not pay, so you've got paramedics, ambulance workers in an ambulance, patient in the back, waiting outside a hospital for hours, right? Absolute nightmare all round for everybody. People don't go into work to do that. Patients don't want that. Is that the government's fault, or are there not people in the NHS whose job it is, on a decent amount of money, logistically, to make sure that doesn't happen?
You've made an excellent point, because this really isn't just about pay. What our members are telling us is this is about saving the NHS as well. We have paramedic members who are sitting in those ambulances, waiting outside hospitals, knowing that all it takes is to get the patient inside and their lives can be saved. We have now, even if you took the lowest figure, around 500 excess deaths, people dying because
but whose fault is that? Why are these ambulances waiting out? Is there not someone who's employed in the NHS that the taxpayer is paying now, who's not Steve Bartley, not the Health Secretary, whose job it is to try to organise the NHS better? Why is it always the government's fault?
If only it were that simple. But it's not just a matter of the ambulances queuing up outside. It's about what's going on in the hospital as well. It's about not being able to discharge people quickly enough, and it's about not having enough staff to be able to deal with those patients. So it's not just one person in the hospital's responsibility. If you want to find one person whose responsibility it is, then it is Rishi Sunak. It is an abdication of leadership. He now needs to take charge, because clearly Steve Bartley isn't capable of dealing with it. He doesn't have the authority. The Prime Minister now needs to step in.
All right. OK, well, there you go. Ane, thank you very much. Ane Kassab there, who is the National Officer at Unite the Union, just whizzing you through the latest on the ambulance strikes there. Interesting, I suppose. What do you make of that? I suppose it's clearly nobody in the NHS's fault, all but the fault of the government, in his view. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. We'll cross live to the House of Commons very shortly. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner is expected to demand answers to Nadine Zahawi's tax affairs. But first, OK, we're going live now. House of Commons, Deputy Labour Leader Angela Rayner is questioning the government on vetting ministerial appointments.
And managing conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question, to which it's a pleasure to respond. Starting with ministerial appointments. Appointments made to His Majesty's Government are a matter solely for the Prime Minister, in line with his constitutional position as the Sovereign's principal adviser and the head of the Government. It is for the Prime Minister to recommend individuals for appointment. In considering potential appointments, the Prime Minister may receive advice from the Civil Service on matters of propriety and potential conflicts of interest. The Civil Service has no role in approving or vetoing appointments, as appointments are a matter for the Prime Minister. It would not be appropriate for me to comment further on the advice that may be given during the appointments process. It is critical that all Prime Ministers are able to receive advice in confidence. I would not want to do anything to erode that ability. Once an appointment is made, the process for the management of conflicts of interest and potential conflicts is clear and robust, and follows the processes set out in the Ministerial Code. It is the responsibility of all ministers to ensure that no conflict arises or could reasonably be perceived to arise between their role and their private interests, financial or otherwise. That is ultimately incumbent on the individual, and this is clearly set out in the Ministerial Code. Ministers should declare and manage potential conflicts of interest, working with their Permanent Secretary and the Independent Adviser on ministers' interests. They are under an ongoing duty to further declare relevant changes to their interests. Honourable members will be aware that the Prime Minister has appointed Sir Laurie Magnus as his Independent Adviser on ministers' interests. Sir Laurie will be taking forward the work on the declaration of ministers' interests in line with his published terms of reference. As the Prime Minister confirmed this morning, the Independent Adviser will also be conducting an investigation to establish the facts surrounding the matters concerning my right honourable friend, the member for Stratford-upon-Avon, that have been subject to media reports over the weekend. I know that Sir Laurie will bring integrity and rigour to the role of Independent Adviser, and the outcome of his work will be made public in due course.
Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. But we may have a carousel of ministers, but it's the same old excuses every single time. Reports that the then Chancellor of the Exchequer agreed a settlement with the HMRC, including a penalty, raised serious concerns, not just about that case, but standards in this entire government. Can the Minister tell us if the vetting process raised flags to the former Prime Minister about the original appointment, and when exactly did this Prime Minister know? Does he know if and how this conflict of interest was managed? And why was it kept secret, Mr. Speaker? Is there no system in place to prevent a person being actively investigated for unpaid tax being appointed to run the UK's tax system? Maybe it's that absurd, Mr. Speaker, that no one would ever think it would happen. While we understand the confidentiality of the honours process, surely where there's a serving minister is blocked, there is an overwhelming case for sounding the alarm. So did that happen? And where is the report? If not, why is there a lower bar to get into this cabinet than there is to get a knighthood? Number 10 apparently still doesn't know if other ministers are in dispute over their own taxes. So what is the Prime Minister doing about it? Last week, he told the House all questions had been answered, and he was told that there was no outstanding issues. Yet now, the independent advisor is investigating. So will he publish the terms of reference? And why does the Prime Minister need an advisor to tell him that this conduct is unethical? If this isn't a breach of the ministerial code, surely the code itself is wrong, Mr. Speaker, and it's the Prime Minister's job to fix it. If the Prime Minister came clean about what he knew and when, and took responsibility for the conduct of his own cabinet, would we need yet another investigation into another member of his top team? Even now, Number 10 says the party chair retains the Prime Minister's full confidence. How can the Prime Minister claim to deliver the integrity, professionalism and accountability that he promised, while his Conservative Party chair still sits in his cabinet?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We follow a proper process under the Ministerial Code. Interests are required to be declared. They are required to be shared through the Ministerial Code process and discussed with permanent secretaries. I am absolutely confident that the usual process would have been followed in the appointment process by this Prime Minister for the right honourable gentleman. And if there are issues to be raised in respect of historic activities, as was suggested by this weekend's press, that is a matter for the independent advisor to look at. And his findings, the summary of his findings, will be published in due course. Integrity, accountability are critical, as is professionalism. And this government will wait and hear the facts before taking decisions based upon those facts. And I think the Right Honourable Lady would do well to do the same.
Richard Fuller. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a great shame that the processes of the proprietary and ethics team of our civil service are being called into disrepute by the comments by the Honourable Lady opposite. We have to accept in public life there are times when you may be asked to serve in government. When you go through that process, you are required, quite rightly, to disclose absolutely everything that might cause conflict with you being a Minister of the Crown. Does my right honourable friend agree that that process can only survive when there is both confidentiality about your disclosures and tolerance on all sides whilst that process is completed?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for what he said is absolutely right. There is, for people being called into government, there is a proper process. There is a requirement for full disclosure. And for that process to continue to be meaningful and to work for decades into the future, you need to retain confidentiality. Confidentiality has to be part of it, and the right way forward, when issues have been raised, is for the independent advisor to look into it, as indeed he is doing.
SNP spokesperson John Nicholson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Here's what we know about the appointment of the BBC chair. The BBC chair, Richard Sharp, helped arrange a £600,000 loan for the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Royston, weeks before he was chosen by the former Prime Minister to become BBC chair. Mr. Sharp appeared before the Culture Select Committee on which I sit. We grilled him about his £400,000 gift to the Conservative Party, However, he did not disclose his role in getting the man appointing him a huge loan. Mr Sharp, the former Prime Minister, and the cousin offering the loan dined together at Chequers pre-loan and pre-appointment. The former Prime Minister's spokesperson says, "So what? Big deal." The Cabinet Office ethics team told the former Prime Minister to stop talking to Mr Sharp about his finances. Ministers told other applicants not to waste their time applying. The appointment was to go to the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip's friend, the Tory donor. Even by the grubby standards of this government, it's all a bit banana republic, is it not?
Who's the chief executive of the SNP?
Mr Speaker, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. As the Honourable Gentleman knows, there was a very robust process in place for the appointment of the chairman of the BBC, including a pre-appointment hearing. I read the transcript this morning in which the Honourable Gentleman played his usual prominent role in grilling the appointee, pre-appointment. It was an incredibly robust process with an independent panel of 5 members that went through that process. And just to reassure the House, I understand that the Commissioner in Public Appointments is going to double-check that that went through, process was absolutely consistent with the proper governance expected of these appointments. And I know that the Chairman of the BBC has invited the Senior Non-Executive Director of the BBC to discuss with the Board to make certain that all relevant conflicts of interest were properly disclosed. So there are 2 processes that are ongoing, but this was a very robust process.
Angela Richards.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I shouldn't be astonished, but I am astonished at the brass neck of the shadow leader of the opposition for suggesting that the Prime Minister didn't need to ask his independent adviser on this when they spent months calling for an independent adviser to be appointed. Is my right honourable friend aware of any plans by the independent adviser to publish an updated list of ministerial interests?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and she's absolutely right. The other side of this House have been calling for an independent adviser for months. One gets appointed, and it's not good enough. You need to take all the decisions by yourself, devoid of all the facts. And it is useful to have an independent adviser in hand to deal with these issues when it is appropriate. And yes, to reassure the Honourable Lady, my understanding is that the independent adviser plans to do a publication on ministerial interest prior to his report in May.
Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Public Administration Constitutional Affairs Committee on SIT is ready to help and looks forward to meeting the new ethics advisor. I think from what the Minister has said, the Prime Minister has said that there are questions to be answered. The Minister has been very careful to say that the filling of the ministerial code is up to the individual, which is correct. So is he trying to tell us, did the Prime Minister know that the member for Stratford was due to be investigated?
Minister.
The Prime Minister will have had the benefit of the usual appointments process being undertaken, so he would have had full disclosure regarding the interests of the Right Honourable gentleman as disclosed at the time when the Prime Minister made his appointment as Chairman of the Conservative Party.
Mahendra.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister has correctly asked his independent adviser on ministerial interests to establish the facts on this matter. Does my right honourable friend agree that we must not prejudge the outcome and allow this process to conclude?
I do agree, Mr Speaker. That is the purpose of having an independent adviser. He's been asked to investigate, to work out exactly what the facts are, and we should not. It's ill-judged to decide before you actually know all the facts that pertain. That is that process we're undergoing at the moment.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm sure we all remember that first speech from Downing Street when the Prime Minister promised us integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. Unfortunately, we've seen precious little evidence of that so far. And this weekend, yet more doubt has been heaped in the minds of the electorate, my constituents certainly, about whether they can trust politicians in general. So does the Minister accept that unless something is done very quickly about the vetting and management of conflicts of interest, further damage is going to be done in the confidence in this place of the British public?
Mr. Speaker, we have the Nolan Principles and we have the Ministerial Code. Both are extremely important documents and extremely important approaches. The Honourable Lady refers to professionalism and she's right, but part of professionalism is making certain you take decisions based on all the facts. And I know she'll respect the fact that it is useful to have those established, but I concede to her definitely those should be established swiftly.
David Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that beneath the bluster from the benches opposite, what they're really saying is there's various information they don't know the answer to, that they don't have the facts about, not least because HMRC doesn't comment on the individual tax affairs of people, and therefore it's absolutely right the independent advisor should be allowed to collect those facts and publish them to set the record straight.
Minister. Indeed, I've got absolutely no doubt my right honourable friend will cooperate in every way with the independent advisor to make certain that all the facts are known. He will go through that process. The independent advisor, in due course, will come to his conclusions, and the summarised conclusions will indeed be published.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister stood on the steps of 10 Downing Street and promised the nation that he would act with integrity, and yet here we are again. Isn't this whole affair yet another point of proof that where there are conflicts of interest, it's far more likely you're going to have conflicts of interest when you've got a government of the super rich for the super rich?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I could never have guessed I'd have a question along those lines from the honourable gentleman. The important thing, the Prime Minister said, integrity, accountability and professionalism. That is absolutely right. That absolutely underpins this government, and part of that is making certain you have the facts, and that is what we are undertaking to do through the auspices of the independent advisor.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Ministerial Code seems to now be a set of guidelines. This is starting to sound like a script from Pirates of the Caribbean. But can I ask the Minister, if someone has disclosed that they are in dispute with the Inland Revenue about their taxes, is it appropriate to then appoint that person as the Chancellor of the Exchequer? Surely that matter should have been resolved before such an appointment took place.
Minister?
The Honourable gentleman will have to excuse me. I do not know what was disclosed, and nor does the Honourable gentleman. That is why we have an independent advisor making certain that we have the facts addressed.
Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The current chairman of the Conservative Party went on to television before he settled his tax debt and said that his tax affairs were, quote, fully paid and up to date. We now know that statement was untrue, don't we?
Minister?
I've got a great deal of respect for the honourable gentleman, but he knows I don't know the answer to that question. I genuinely don't. But I've got no doubt that the work of the independent advisor will establish the facts, and that will be reported to the Prime Minister.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The challenge here for the Minister is that the original allegations arose in July of last year publicly, and subsequent evidence that indeed lawyers were instructed to try and suppress those allegations well before any appointment made by his political party or indeed by the Prime Minister. Now, the Minister talks about allegations arising this weekend. Whose due diligence was lacking? Is it the Cabinet Office? Is it the Conservative Office? Or are we just not being told the whole truth on this matter?
Minister.
The full process would have been undergone in terms of my right honourable friend's appointment to the government as chairman of the Conservative Party, or appointment to the Cabinet Office, when he was appointed by this Prime Minister. That was clearly a period after the July commentary in the press. So I don't know what was disclosed. I imagine everything was disclosed, but that is a matter for the independent advisor to ascertain.
Ben Bradshaw.
BBC journalists have to spend a great deal of their time defending the BBC's impartiality and integrity from criticisms from all sides in this country. How is their job made easier by the revelation that the current BBC chairman involved himself in the private financial affairs of a former Prime Minister before he was appointed to the job, something that both he and the Prime Minister should under civil service rules and BBC rules have
OK, all right, we're going to pull away from the House of Commons there. Interesting back and forth that can probably be summarised in a rather small nutshell, which is everyone shouting Jeremy Quinn there, who's the Minister of the Cabinet Office, basically saying, look, come on, you've got to sack this guy. Jeremy Quinn saying, well, we've got an independent inquiry, so you're just going to have to wait and see what the upshot of that is. But our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, will no doubt pick the bones out of this in a much more intellectual way. Darren joins us now from Westminster. What do you make of that, Darren?
Well, interesting, isn't it? When the Speaker got up at the start of that urgent question, he was reminding members that you can't really specifically talk about the case for the honourable member for Stratford-upon-Avon, that is Nadhim Zahawi, the current chairman of the Conservative Party. But Labour give it their best attempts by trying to talk around the subject when it comes to the Ethics Committee and indeed the standards in public life, or indeed the ministerial code. As you said, the government are robustly saying, frankly, we have launched this independent investigation. The Number 10's ethic advisor is going to look into what Nadhim Zahawi did and when it comes to his tax affairs, and indeed how transparent he's been about that. While at the same time, Labour are trying with their paintbrush to say this is yet another scandal engulfing the government at a time when it seemingly can't run away from scandals. In the end, though, we have moved from a situation, haven't we, Patrick, where a matter of days ago the Prime Minister stood up in Parliament at PMQs and frankly said there is nothing to see here, that the former Chancellor had been open and transparent, and then this morning said, well, sorry, there are questions to answer, and that is why I'm launching this investigation. So in the end, this is going to rumble on. Yes, this investigation has bought both the Prime Minister and Nadhim Zahawi a bit more time, but frankly those questions are not going away about the fact that he seems to have paid £5 million back to HMRC, including a penalty for not properly sorting out his tax affairs, though he says it was frankly a mistake rather than something that was done deliberately. But it was done while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, when he effectively was in charge of HMRC. One other note, and you may well have picked it up at the end there, Patrick, there were separate questions today also about Boris Johnson and the current chairman of the BBC. That's a man called Richard Sharp. Well, interestingly, in the last hour, it's also been announced that his hiring as BBC chairman is going to be reviewed by the Commissioner of Public Appointments, William Shawcross, after allegations in the Sunday Times over the weekend that he may well have been involved in helping sort out Boris Johnson finances. So lots of investigations, lots of questions at the moment, but frankly, very few answers.
Indeed, Darren, thank you very, very much. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor in Westminster. Right, loads to talk about there, but not enough time to do it, because coming up, more on the news that over half of households in the UK receive more money from the government than they pay in tax, and more as Conservative Party Chairman Nadhim Zahawi is facing calls to resign following a row over his tax affairs. I don't think he's going to go anywhere anytime soon.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office. We keep the north-south split tonight, with much of the north cloudy and relatively mild, clear, cold and frosty again across the south. But again, there will be some thick fog patches under this area of high pressure. Low pressure systems to the north, weather fronts not producing much in the way of rain. But with the winds coming in from the west, it is much milder here. In the south, with the clear skies, the frost coming back pretty quickly this evening, the blue taking hold of the chart. Not quite so clear, though, for the East Anglian coast and down across Kent. There'll be more cloud and even the odd shower here. A little bit of patchy rain for western Scotland and the west of Northern Ireland too, but most places dry. The cloud making a big difference to those temperatures above freezing across the north, well below further south. And there will be some dense fog patches as well. Just be aware of that first thing in the morning in this zone from Lincolnshire down to southwest England. That is the zone with the frost as well, but it will melt away during Tuesday morning. A cloudy day for parts of East Anglia and the southeast. Feeling cold here, whereas we'll have milder conditions with a lot of cloud further north, but some brighter skies across Aberdeenshire could see temperatures getting close to 13 degrees. Further south will struggle to get much above 4 or 5, so a cold day here. And if the fog sticks, we may not get much above freezing. And speaking of freezing, temperatures drop back down below during Tuesday evening, where we keep these clearer skies across the south. Again, some fog thickening, but a bit of a shift further north. A weather front bringing some rain across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Nothing too heavy, but that weather front will bring thicker cloud and rain and drizzle into northern England, parts of Wales during Wednesday. Further south, again, some early fog and frost. Generally just a cloudy, cold day here. It will turn brighter further north, but as the winds switch direction, it will turn a little cooler here, whereas slowly temperatures just starting to rise across parts of the south later this week. Bye for now.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, wonderful people. I am back and raring to go. It's Patrick Christys with you all the way through until 6 o'clock, and I've got a load for you this hour because number 10 is saying that Rishi Sunak retains confidence in Nadhim Zahawi as Tory party chair and hopes the investigation into him is completed as quickly as possible. This investigation has been launched as questions are asked over Zahawi's tax affairs. Within the last half an hour, in fact, just within the last few minutes, really, we've heard from the Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner. She's demanding answers. It's ongoing in the House of Commons. We're going to bring you the latest on that. For what it's worth, the government's line is, we've got an independent inquiry. We're sticking to that. Give us a break. What happened to innocent until proven guilty, basically? Also this hour, though, is it fair to suggest that a majority of Brits have a something-for-nothing mindset? Are we all on the take? Are we lazy? Are we slouches? Are we scroungers? A new report from Civitas suggests that more than half of households in the UK, that's around 36 million people, by the way, receive more money from the government than they pay in tax. Reasons for this, they're saying, ageing population, could mass immigration at a lower economic scale be part of it as well? We're going to pick the bones out of this one. And as ambulance workers strike today, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says giving pay rises to striking staff, including ambulance workers and nurses, would lead to money being taken away from elsewhere in the NHS budget. The Conservative MP for Ashfield, Lee Anderson, he says the use of food banks has turned into a culture of entitlement rather than poverty as well. We'll be talking about that. Do you agree? Get in touch. Email me. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Two things. Do you think Zahawi should just go, jump before he's pushed? If indeed he's pushed at all, of course. Do you think he should go? Second thing as well is, do you think there's too many people in Britain on the take? gbviews@gbnews.uk. But now, it's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top story on GB News today. The Prime Minister has asked his independent ethics advisor to investigate the Tory party chairman's tax affairs. Nadhim Zahawi has welcomed the investigation, saying he's confident he acted properly throughout. The former Chancellor has admitted he paid a penalty to HMRC following an error over shares in the polling company YouGov, which he co-founded. He hasn't disclosed the size of the settlement which is believed to be almost £5 million. Rishi Sunak says clearly there are questions that need answering.
Well, these things are dealt with by an independent advisor who will fully investigate this matter and provide advice to me as Prime Minister on Nadhim Zahawi's compliance with the ministerial code. That's the right approach, it's the professional approach, and that's how we'll restore integrity and accountability into government overall, is by making sure that when situations like this arise, we deal with them promptly, we deal with them professionally, and that's what we're doing in this case.
Well, the tax expert Dan Needle, who was among the first to examine Mr Zahawi's financial affairs, says exposing the former Chancellor's failings is in the public interest.
I'm not in favour of people, MPs, ministers generally publishing their tax affairs, but if the Chancellor of the Exchequer was so careless as not to report £27 million of income or gains, I think that is a matter of public interest. And if he then denies there is a problem, denies he benefits from an offshore structure, when he does, and sends legal threats to people reporting on it, that seems to me certainly a matter of public interest.
Meanwhile, the process of appointing BBC Chairman Richard Sharp is to be reviewed by the Commissioner of Public Appointments. That's after Mr Sharp asked for a scrutiny panel to examine potential conflicts of interest, following claims he was involved in securing a loan of up to £800,000 for Boris Johnson. He insists he didn't make a loan or arrange any financing and only made an introduction to a guarantor. Now, away from politics today, thousands of ambulance workers are striking for the third time in 5 weeks. Unison and the GMB union members across England and Wales have walked out, along with staff at 2 hospital trusts in Liverpool. Further industrial action is planned in the coming weeks by nurses and other NHS workers. Union leaders are calling for fair pay, accusing the government of not wanting to find a resolution. But the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the action is hugely disappointing and warned patients of disruption. Now, the energy regulator is launching a review of the checks and balance companies used to place customers on prepayment meters. Ofgem is threatening legal action if they don't take due care in the process. The Chief Executive, Jonathan Beerley, says the number of people forced onto prepayment meters is extremely high and vulnerable customers shouldn't be left in the dark and cold during winter.
From April, households on median disposable income will spend 10% of that on their energy bills, and those relying on the state pension will spend 29%. That is a truly extraordinary part of our household budgets. And even with the energy price guarantee and energy bills discount scheme, I know that the scale of the challenge for many people out there remains enormous.
And lastly, dozens of firefighters are tackling a blaze in Edinburgh. Scottish Fire and Rescue were called to the Jenners building at around 11:30 this morning with 10 fire trucks in attendance. No casualties reported so far, but some streets surrounding the former department store have been cordoned off. We'll give you more detail on that, of course, when we get it. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Welcome back, everybody. OK, we're going to have to rattle through it this hour because, frankly, there's too much for us to talk about. So, speaking in the House of Commons, in the few moments just gone, the Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, said what has emerged about Nadhim Zahawi and his tax affairs was so absurd that people must have assumed it would never happen. Not the only time I imagine that she's heard that, but Zahawi is under increasing pressure that the revelations that he paid a penalty to HMRC over previously unpaid tax whilst he was Chancellor as part of this multi-million-pound dispute. And by extension, Rishi Sunak is now being scrutinised with questions emerging over how much he knew about Zahawi's tax affairs when he appointed him as a government minister. It's all in line to the course that Rishi Sunak made a massive deal, didn't he, about honesty, integrity and all of this stuff. So an independent investigation into the tax affairs of Nadhim Zahawi has been ordered by the Prime Minister earlier today. So, in a nutshell, people, we have someone who may or may not, categorically denies, may or may not have done anything a little bit dodgy with the tax, has now paid everything back, in his view anyway, plus a fine. Rishi Sunak saying, well, let's leave it over to the independent inquiry. Labour saying, you should just sack him anyway. Here we are now with Darren McCaffrey, who's got the latest, our political editor in Westminster. Darren, thank you very much. We'll move on because it's not the only big development in politics today, to be fair, but starting with the old Nadeem Zahawi stuff, this independent inquiry, are we just going to have to wait and see? It's innocent until proven guilty, the government would say?
Yeah, Number 10 would say that they're going through a due process here, which is, i.e., clearly questions have arisen about Nadeem Zahawi. Now, it must be said, he for years denied that there was anything to see here, and yet it has emerged over the last couple of days that not only has he had to settle his tax bill with HMRC, but he's also had to pay a penalty fine, if you like, for not having settled it much earlier. And he did that while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, why does that matter? Well, it just happens that if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, you're ultimately in charge of His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And so, in the end, lots of people are suggesting this doesn't look good, and also that Nadeem Zahawi has not been as open and honest and transparent as he should have been in all of this. And that then leads on to the Prime Minister, doesn't it? Because it raises questions about his appointment as Conservative Party chair, about, again, precisely what did the Prime Minister know and when. But you're right in suggesting that by Number 10 launching this investigation, they can turn around and say, well, hold on a second, the ethics advisor Number 10 is looking into all of this. It's independent of us inside Downing Street and indeed of government. It's right he carries out his work, and that in the end we will get the answers to these questions. It'll just not be today.
It's an interesting political situation, though, isn't it? Because as far as Nadeem Zahawi is no doubt concerned, even if there is absolutely nothing really wrong apart from the obvious and he's paid it off and it was an honest mistake and all of this, if he falls on his sword, the public perception, rightly or wrongly, will be that bit dodgy, right? Of course, he would deny all of this, but that will be the public perception. So he's not really going to go. Then if Rishi Sunak sacks him, well, he's just sacked the head of, the Tory party chairman, which who knows what ramifications that might have behind the scenes for him. It is a bit of a mess and no doubt a massive test of Rishi Sunak's leadership.
Yeah, I think the reason politically this is kind of very, very tricky, if you like, for the government are two things. First of all, Nadeem Zahawi has not answered all questions, let's be honest about that, as transparently as he claimed he has. I mean, even the Prime Minister today, despite having stood up in the Commons last week, by the way, saying there's nothing to see here, has now suggested that there are questions to answer, hence why he's launched this investigation. So there's not been transparency. And again, that's why it comes back to the Prime Minister, because it was him, Rishi Sunak, who stood in front of Downing Street and said that there will be transparency and integrity at the heart of his government. And many would suggest that the handling thus far of this affair has not necessarily demonstrated this. Now, many would also say, well, you know what, frankly, this hasn't got an awful lot to do with Rishi Sunak. Yes, it's happened on his watch, in the sense that, Nadeem Zahawi was Chancellor when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, not under Rishi Sunak, though he has and was moved to a different cabinet position. And all this, of course, while there's another controversy happening today, again involving Boris Johnson, if you like, involving the current chairman of the BBC, that's a man called Richard Sharp, who's going to have his appointment reviewed by the Commissioner of Public Appointments, William Shawcross. This all links back to a loan, it seems, or money that Boris Johnson had access to when he was Prime Minister, and what precisely Richard Sharp's role in that seems to have been. It seems, according to the Sunday Times, they're alleging that he was a guy that introduced Boris Johnson to certain people to get access to that potential loan, while at the same time trying to become chairman of the BBC, something that the Prime Minister has the ultimate decision in. So that is why William Shawcross is going to look into all of this. And for the opposition, of course, this is manna from heaven in the sense that it bleeds into a certain sense that this government is facing one scandal after another, though clearly it's a lot more complex than simply just that.
Absolutely. Darren, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor in Westminster. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be speaking to Robert Palmer, who's the Executive Director of Tax Justice UK, a group seeking to ensure that everyone in the UK benefits from a sustainable, fair and effective tax system. But let's just have a very quick listen to what Angela Rayner had to say a moment ago in the House of Commons.
Is there no system in place to prevent a person being actively investigated for unpaid tax being appointed to run the UK's tax system? Maybe it's that absurd, Mr Speaker, that no one would ever think it would happen. While we understand the confidentiality of the honours process, surely where there's a serving minister is blocked, there is an overwhelming case for sounding the alarm.
OK, right. Joining me now is Robert Palmer, the Executive Director of Tax Justice UK, which is a group seeking to ensure that everyone in the UK benefits from a sustainable, fair and effective tax system. How easy do you reckon it would be for Nadhim Zahawi to have just made an innocent, honest mistake?
I mean, this is reportedly £27 million of income that he apparently forgot to tell the tax authorities about, or possibly claimed was not actually his money, but was his father's. I mean, it's very difficult to know exactly what happened. That's between Nadhim Zahawi and HMRC for the moment. But it stretches credulity to really think that this was something that you just forgot, you know, some several £1 million that were sort of back down the sofa. And I think why this is so important, beyond the politics of the moment, is this month, millions of people around the country are doing their own tax returns, and they don't have access to the same type of lawyers or advisors, and people pay the tax that they have to.
Well, I get that, but actually one can point to numerous situations, numerous very high-profile situations where people have employed an accountant to do exactly what you've just said there, which frankly is their job, which is to do your accounts. That accountant has decided that they've done something a little bit ropey, they want to plonk a bit of it offshore or move some stuff around. The individual in question, who is not an accountant, doesn't necessarily know what they're doing, goes along with it, and you end up in a situation, potentially, dare I say it, a bit like this. Are you rushing to assume that Zahawi is guilty before we've had this independence inquiry?
I mean, I think there are two things there, and you make a really good point about the role of professionals, you know, accountants, lawyers, bankers, who are often providing the advice that lead high-profile people to get in trouble. At the same time, their clients are probably the ones that saying, you know, do my tax affairs in this way, I want to maybe reduce my tax, I want to lower my tax bill, who knows? So I think, you know, definitely we should think about what the role of the professionals are. But I do think there's a really big, you know, there's a political case here as well, which was Nadhim Zahawi was the Chancellor of the Exchequer responsible for the tax authorities. At the same time, he was negotiating around his own personal tax affairs with HMRC. So however this ends, it does not look good for Nadhim Zahawi. And it also raises questions about what HMRC were doing. You know, why did it take them so long to get on top of this?
Yeah, look, and frankly, Robert, we'll be talking about this again, no doubt, as the situation develops. As far as we're concerned right now, it's almost just about all we can say about it, isn't it? Because there's so many things unanswered at the minute. We do have to wait, like it or loathe it, for the results of this independence inquiry. And in the fullness of time, one would imagine that we will learn more. Robert, thank you very much. Robert Palmer, the Executive Director of Tax Justice UK. Right, now strap yourselves in, people, because it is a rather tax-heavy top of this hour, and including the fact that I, indeed, myself, had a phone call with HMRC earlier today. I am sick to the hind teeth of tax, but here we go. Are Brits starting to widely expect something for nothing? I'm certainly not. A new study has found the number of households who receive more in benefits and state help than they pay in tax has reached a record high. So let's just simplify this. Are people scroungers? Are people, frankly, on the take? Or is this now a psychological thing? After COVID, as the government is trying to say, did we become used to the government doing more for us than maybe we should actually expect? The analysis from the think tank Civitas shows that around 54% of households that get more from the government than they contribute. And MPs are attributing the rapid rise in dependency to COVID handouts. They are claiming that there's a psychological thing at play here. It was also found that the top 10% of earners account for 53% of all income tax. So if you're one of those people sat at home now who says hates the rich, let's tax the rich to high heaven more, well, the top 10% of earners account for 53% of all income tax. It's not a bad showing, that, from the rich, is it? Joining me now in the studio is Elliot Keck, Investigations Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Elliot, thank you very much. Are too many people on the take?
Well, firstly, I'm very glad to hear that HMRC picked up the phone, because I know for a long time they weren't, so that's reassuring. Well, it took me an hour and a half. Anyway, let's not get into my personal affairs, or I've seen how that ends. So I think, you know, this is a really interesting Sure, and to some extent it cuts both ways. Inevitably, in a fair taxation system, the people at the top are going to be paying a larger share than the people at the bottom, and the people at the bottom are going to be receiving the sorts of benefits at a higher level relative to those at the top. So to some extent, this is a natural reflection of a relatively fair taxation system. But on the other hand, a figure this high at sort of 53, 54% is a reflection of the extent to which so many people have become dependent on the state.
Is it now too easy to sit around, do nothing or do precious little, and earn a very similar amount to people who get off their backsides every day and go to work?
Well, that's the difference between blue-collar and white-collar work, and people have strong opinions on that. I think, what this research shows is that we have grown dependent on the state. I don't think that's healthy. The state are not your parents. They should not choose how you spend your money. That should be up to you. And we've seen a particular spike. And yes, it is because of COVID, but actually these figures don't include furlough. So furlough is not included in this money given from the state to people. So this figure is actually masking a much, much higher one. And it's one that will only come down if we begin to reevaluate our relationship with the state and start bringing down those record high tax burdens.
Well, it's split the inbox a bit here. So I've got the likes of lovely Linda, thank you very much. Linda's saying that I'm receiving disability benefits. I can't tell you how hard it has been to receive this particular benefit. Don't want to be tarred with the same brush as scroungers, Linda. Absolutely, 100%. The same breath we've got Ian on. I know families with 3 generations who've never worked in their lives, as they know how to screw the system. And there is clearly a bit of that going on. What has gone wrong here? Has the government created a situation where it's too easy for people to be beneficial? And dare I say, is there something a bit more sinister going on? Is it in the interest of the state to have as many citizens as possible dependent on it?
I don't think it's in the interest of the state. I'd hope it's not in the interest of anybody, really, for people to be dependent on the state. I mean, listen, COVID did mean a lot of people went on to benefits, and the problem when you have a very, very large benefit system with many, many people on it, it becomes very difficult to, separate those who are in genuine need from those who aren't, and that does, harm to absolutely everybody. So, government needs to get the benefit system under control. Right. We found that, for example, benefits overpayment in the latest financial year was about £300 million. So it needs to get this system under control to make sure that only the people that need it are actually getting it.
Now, I'm intrigued to get a bit of an answer for this. I'm not sure if you're the man for this. I don't know. You may know more than I do on it. But we were told, weren't we, things like mass migration, for example, great thing for the country, great thing for our economy. And I'm sure in certain circumstances it is. But if people are, say, first generation and are maybe towards, some of them will be, a lot of them will be towards the lower economic spectrum. That's the natural progression. You come here to make a better life for yourself, start towards the bottom, work your way up, right? Well, is it fair to say now, then, that we're looking at a situation where a lot of these people are taking much more out of our system than are putting in? And does that pop the mass migration bubble somewhat?
I think immigration, there's always been very, very mixed evidence based on, who contributes and how much they contribute, whether it's low incomes, high incomes. I think given the situation of the country, the fact that in our, labour market, we have millions and millions of people who are not even recorded as being in the labour market, and instead recording long-term sickness and things like that. Clearly, there's a very, very large pool of people within this country that possibly could be working if those health issues were resolved. I think possibly before we got to talking about the need for immigration.
Finally, do we need to stop demonising rich people? Because apparently they account for the top 10% accounts for 53% of income tax. It's all very well and good saying we need to tax the rich more. If they all leave, we won't have an NHS.
Well, yeah, and the top 1% pay around 25 to 27% of income tax. So that's sort of the data that's generally put about. So, yeah, I mean, it's very much a reminder that there's this saying, sort of taxation, that you want to pluck as many feathers from the goose without it, with a minimum amount of hissing. And I think clearly we are reaching the point where just saying that we need to tax the rich more is not going to be an effective solution.
No, because they'll disappear. And then, like I said there, we won't have public services. But there we go. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show, as ever. Thank you very much for coming into the studio. Elliot Keck, their investigations campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Well, we're checking out Taxpayers Alliance as well, actually. They always do some very good reports, looking out for your best interests. But you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. Well, he's on because the electricity battery manufacturer, British Volt, well, they fell flat in the northeast, leaving hundreds without a job. I've got all of that coming your way and much, much more, including some rather interesting woke war stuff. Is the left indoctrinating children at school? We'll be finding out with Catherine Birbalsingh, who is, of course, top dog when it comes to kids' education. Back in a tick.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride. Oh, she's on it today! Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, well, welcome back, people. I've got loads coming your way, and the inbox has popped right off as well. GBviews at gbnews.uk asking whether or not you think Nadeem Zahawi should just go, and also, in light of the report that now there's more people in this country who take from the state as opposed to actually benefiting for the state, as it were. I want to know whether or not you think there's too many people here on the take. GBviews at gbnews.uk. But before all of that, Tory politicians have talked for some time about a Gigafactory due to be built in the northeast. And at the end of last week, the company behind the new plans went bust. So where does that leave this flagship project? It all, frankly, ties in with levelling up, doesn't it, of course? And we, as a representative news channel of the UK, we like to get out and about. We're not part of the Westminster bubble or the London bubble, so we sent Liam Halligan up to the northeast, didn't we? Our economics and business editor, and here he is with a special report for On the Money.
This scrappy piece of land in Camas, just north of Newcastle, is the proposed site of Britain's second Gigafactory, £3.6 billion plant, making the batteries that will secure the future of car making in the northeast. Already linked to the national grid, this former power station site is perfect for a battery factory, but not for now, because British Volt, the company building the plant, has gone bust.
It's really, really disappointing for the North East and for the UK to see British Volt where we are. What we'd like to see is the government step up to see if they can support either British Volt or somebody else coming in to take over the site, which is the #1 site in the UK to produce batteries.
Camas is next to the deep water port of Blyth, which is also hooked up to countless offshore turbines which could power a new gigafactory. The North East is meant to be the heart of Britain's new green industrial revolution, with attention now focused on Camas, a site of huge potential.
It's history put in infrastructure that is absolutely required for a site to be a battery plant. The power coming in from the North Sea Collector link, the power station supply to the national grid, the deep sea port here in Blyth, all are key, and the transport links are key to manufacturing batteries and getting them away safely.
But British Volt couldn't sell its vision to enough private sector backers, so £100 million of government money, conditional on private investment, also remains out of reach. Down the coast in Sunderland, US energy company Turntide, making smaller batteries for industrial use, has invested heavily. The company says new investors will emerge to build the gigafactory at Camas.
Turntide overall looked to pivot into the transport electrification space. It looked to the North East because it understood there was production capability, there was engineering capability, and there was just the talent and the depth of workforce to make that happen.
So it seems strange this British Volt factory isn't going to happen.
Like I say, it may happen. We're hoping that someone is going to go in and be able to do something with it. But if it does go down and jobs are lost, from a long-term standpoint, we think the jobs will be picked up elsewhere. We're hiring, for example, and we continue to grow and evolve our business.
Back in Camas, locals say the Gigafactory is just another broken promise. Pub owner John Cholton, son of the 1966 England World Cup hero Jackie, doesn't believe Rishi Sunak's promises of commitment to the region. Do you trust Labour more to get this Gigafactory built?
No, I wouldn't trust either of them, to be honest with you. I mean, what they do is they fight each other, and then it's just they're not worried about the people that live here. They're worried about their own particular parties and their own particular policies, and it's about the people that live in the North East, and they're not being considered at all.
Local dog walker Tracy is also sceptical of Rishi Sunak's claims.
They don't back the North East enough. They say they do, but when it comes down to it, they don't. Don't get us wrong, they have done a lot of things right for other people, but I wouldn't say up here, no. A lot of people's against the Tories up here.
The UK needs an estimated 10 battery-making gigafactories by 2030, when sales of new petrol and diesel vehicles are due to be outlawed. British Volt's plant would have been only the second. But well-informed locals say the strength of the Camas site and the local workforce means this factory will be built.
Yes, I am hopeful, and I'm certain that there will be a plant at the Camas site because of the infrastructure. It is the best site in the country for a battery plant, bar none.
British Volt's failure exposes the Tories to claims levelling up is just a slogan. And voters here in the North East and across the Red Wall will determine the next general election. Liam Halligan, GB News.
And Liam joins me now. Liam Halligan, thank you very, very much. Yes, so levelling up at the minute, well, it's not happening, is it?
Well, this factory has indeed taken on symbolic importance, Patrick. If you can't build a gigafactory to create the batteries that are going in these electric cars that the North East is going to be making in the run-up to 2030, when petrol and diesel cars, new cars, are banned, then where can you make it, given that this site has so many advantages? It's hooked up to the national grid already, it's next to Blythe, there's a willing and ready and qualified local workforce, and there's 100 million quid of state money ready if the company building the factory can raise enough private sector money. But that company, British Volt, couldn't raise enough private sector money, and that's why last week it went bust, and that's why I got on the train and went up to the North East to make the film, trying to find out what's actually going on.
Why not, then? Because that, to me, looks like the kind of thing that people in the private sector would and should want to invest in.
Well, many reasons. We've had, obviously, the war in Ukraine. We've had a global slowdown. We've had lockdown. This has been many years in the making. But I think what's happening now, as I said on GB News earlier, I think there's a kind of high-stakes poker game going on behind the scenes. Look, the government needs this factory. It needs spades in the ground if levelling up can be presented as something that's real rather than just a slogan, as I said at the end of the film. And it needs that to happen before the general election, because in places like the North East, across the so-called Red Wall, the formerly Labour seats that the Tories gained in 2019, the Tories need to retain those seats. People across the Red Wall will say the Tories aren't serious about levelling up. So what I think is happening, and this isn't complete guesswork by any means, is that a lot of the private sector investors, they know the government needs this to happen. They're going to wait a bit, and they're going to make sure, or they're going to try and make sure, the government ups the amount of state support from 100 million to maybe a bit more, maybe significantly more. Because I think without that, the private sector is just going to hold back until the government basically puts a bit more cash on the table.
Well, it's got them by the proverbials, some would say. Liam, are you by any chance, on a slightly different note, although it does involve electricity, are you going to be turning all your lights off at around 5 p.m. tonight to make
Well, if you are going to make
I won't, because I haven't registered with that scheme. It's only 26 energy providers. You've got to have registered. You have to have a smart meter.
No.
There's lots of kind of conditions and so on. And the amount of money on the table is somewhere between 5 and 20 quid. So you're not going to get rich. It might be handy. And indeed, those companies may announce that they're going to do the same tomorrow, because there's a cold snap. And the National Grid has said, there's no problem. There aren't going to be blackouts, as we call them, but they want the buffer to be a bit bigger. So they are encouraging people to use a bit less energy.
It said, from what I gather, no oven, no washing machine. Well, that's every night round at my house. That's all right. It's fine. No problem there. I'll be a millionaire if that was the case.
And no charging of electric vehicles and so on. Look, I think this is interesting that this is happening, trying to ration power. I also think there's a bit of a campaign to get us all onto smart meters, because once you're on a smart meter, you get into a situation where your energy company sort of taking money off you up front and keeping hold of your money based on the readings on the smart meter.
Like the mafia.
Which a lot of people, well, they would deny that, which a lot of people don't like in principle. But I think we will see more of this. I think we will see more energy rationing as this war in Ukraine continues.
Yes, indeed. Liam, thank you very much. As ever, Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor. Right, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. I'll be discussing how Suella Braverman has ordered a review into politically correct presentations for civil servants on gender-based language. There's loads to this. It also comes on the day that a road called Black Boy Lane in Haringey was changed. At the cost, by the way, around 180 grand to the local taxpayer, despite, from what I can gather anyway, no one caring and the name not having proper racial connotations. The world's gone mad. It's basically woke watch. I will speak to a former social mobility czar who's claimed some of the country's top private schools as well are now being hollowed out by woke culture. What on earth is going on? We'll pick the bones out of the absolute lot of it. I'll see you in a sec after the headlines.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. The Prime Minister has asked his independent ethics advisor to investigate the Tory party chair's tax affairs. Nadine Zahawi has welcomed the investigation, saying he's confident he acted properly throughout. The former Chancellor has admitted he paid a penalty to HMRC following an error over shares in the polling company YouGov, which he co-founded. He hasn't disclosed the size of the settlement, which is believed to be almost £5 million. Rishi Sunak says clearly there are questions that need answering.
Well, these things are dealt with by an independent advisor who will fully investigate this matter and provide advice to me as Prime Minister on Nadine Zahawi's compliance with the ministerial code. That's the right approach, it's the professional approach, and that's how we'll restore integrity and accountability into government overall, is by making sure that when situations like this arise, we deal with them promptly, we deal with them professionally, and that's what we're doing in this case.
The process of appointing BBC Chairman Richard Sharp is to be reviewed by the Commissioner of Public Appointments. Mr Shawcross said the review would ensure the process had been run in compliance with government rules. Richard Sharp has asked for a scrutiny panel to look at potential conflicts of interest over his links with Boris Johnson. It follows reports that he was involved in securing a loan of up to £800,000 for the then Prime Minister, which Mr Sharp denies. Thousands of ambulance workers are striking for the third time in 5 weeks. Unison and GMB union members across England and Wales have walked out, along with staff at 2 hospital trusts in Liverpool. Union leaders are calling for fair pay, accusing the government of not wanting to find a resolution. The Health Secretary, though, Steve Barclay, says the action is hugely disappointing and warned patients of disruption. And as you've been hearing, the National Grid has announced it could pay households to slash their electricity use again tomorrow after launching the demand flexibility scheme today. Households with smart meters can receive discounts if they cut their energy use during peak times, including from 5 until 6 p.m. today. 26 suppliers are signed up for the initiative. Those are your news headlines on GB News. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere. We're back in just a jiffy.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
OK, now, I don't know about you, but I've had enough of strikes, I've had enough of government inquiries into all sorts of different things, one of them potentially even about a seatbelt, for goodness sake. So let's move it on. Let's talk about some stuff that I think actually affects a lot of you, gets you all talking around the dinner table, gets you all talking about the water cooler at work. And some of the countries, top private schools, get this, are being hollowed out by woke culture. This is part of a much bigger issue, and a lot of it, I imagine, is going to have you pulling your hair out or screaming at your telly thinking this is mad, because it is. A former social mobility czar has claimed that that woke culture basically is hollowing out these private schools. Catherine Birbalsingh, dubbed as the country's strictest head teacher, maybe slightly unfair, I don't know anyway, claims that Britain's public schools were being jeopardised by incessant attacks on the privilege. Birbalsingh, who has been very critical of the UK school system, was appointed to lead the government's social mobility chair back in November of 2021. Now, she quit after a year, saying that her outspoken views were doing more harm than good. As I've said, this is part of a bigger picture, and we're going to talk about it now with the lady herself. Catherine joins me now. Catherine, thank you very, very much. So, explain to me what is going on in terms of woke culture in schools hollowing things out. Just set the scene for me.
Well, we're very traditional here at Michaela, and we're in Wembley, and we have an innocent intake, and we believe strict discipline, which is why they call me the strictest headmistress, and in Britain. And we believe in very high standards, children doing lots of homework and working really hard. And sometimes people don't like that. With regard to the private sector, I would say that we believe wrongly that private schools are great bastions of traditionalism. I don't think they are. I think they used to be. I think these days they can feel quite a lot of guilt around their privilege. And when you feel guilty about your privilege, you tend to become a lot more modern. So they might embrace decolonization with great gusto. They might be less inclined to have the adult be the authority in the classroom leading the learning, and instead allow the children to lead the learning. And instead of teaching children how grateful they should be for their parents working hard for them, for their teachers working hard for them, instead they might indulge their sense of entitlement. That sometimes teenagers can complain about, oh, woe is me, I'm the center of the world, etc. And sometimes if you're not more of a traditionalist, you can indulge that kind of behavior.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of that going on in private schools than we realize.
Bear in mind as well, Catherine, we're about to go on to talk about a story about Haringey Council at vast expense to the local taxpayer changing the name of a road that nobody cared about after numerous consultations that barely anyone took part in and a couple of presentations, by the way, which nobody turned up to. In fact, one person turned up to voice their opposition to the idea of changing the name of Black Boy Lane. They've then changed the sign, kept... This road is now formally known as Black Boy Lane, so the offensive bit is still there, right? This is the world that we live in. But in your field as a headmistress, what's the long-term societal impact of having this woke tosh in schools?
Well, it changes the culture of the country, doesn't it? And especially when it's happening in private schools, a lot of these young people will go off and take up positions in government and big banks and so on in the city. And they will be in positions of power, whether we like it or not. And we might want to argue that private schools shouldn't be happening. But the fact is, it will happen. And if they're all made to feel very guilty about their privilege, look, I went to a dinner the other night and there was a young man, about 24 years old, sat next to me. And I was asking him about school and so on. I'm a headmistress, etc. And he said to me how he'd been to school just outside of London. And we were up in Leeds, actually. And I said, oh, outside of London. I said, oh, so where was that? And he said, oh, well, I went to private school. And I said, oh, well, which private school was that? He said, oh, it was just outside of Slough. Eventually, I got him to admit that it was Eton. But he didn't want to tell me, you know? I mean, it's crazy. Why is he feeling so awkward and embarrassed? And that's because they're made to feel bad about their schools.
And we now, again, this is a fantastic segue into either bookend of this show, actually, Catherine. It's almost like we planned it, although, as you well know, we didn't. Because at the top of the show, we were talking about the fact that now more than ever, people are more dependent on the state. And I can't help but wonder as though success or having any kind of benefit in life, whether that's out of hard work or luck, and frankly, that's what being born is sometimes, just luck, is frowned upon. And this is a bad thing, surely.
Yes, well, indeed. And this guy desperately tried to explain to me about how his parents had to scrape the money together to send him to Eton, and he really wasn't privileged at all. And I kept saying, it's okay, it's okay. I get it, it's fine. You went to Eton, I don't worry about it. Why are we making people feel bad about their parents working hard to give them the best possible opportunities in life? It's something I have huge respect for. If a parent is sacrificing in order to make sure that their child gets an excellent education, that is something that we should take our hats off to, not condemn. And so there's something wrong with our society when we are trying to encourage people to do less by their children instead of more.
I could not agree more, and you will not be able to hear it, but there's rather a lot of cheering going on around me from a lot of people in this newsroom who maybe do work incredibly hard to try to give their children the best start in life, or what they view to be the best start in life. As a parent, they can make that decision for their children and don't want to be stigmatised in order to do it. Catherine, do you think that at the very heart of this, at the very core of this, there's something, frankly, very annoying, which is needless, unnecessary virtue signalling? So people seeming as though they have to do things like decolonise the curriculum or teach these things about whether people are non-binary or whatever, or, for example, change the name of a road that nobody cares about, just to be able to say, we've done this, despite the fact that actually nobody cares.
Yeah. I think there is some truth to that. I think there are some people who are doing things just to be seen to do them. So, a lot of these people will put black boxes up on Instagram and say, look at me, I'm an anti-racist. And that is about virtue signaling. But I do think there are some people who genuinely think that by putting a black box up on Instagram or by changing that sign of that road, that means that they are good people and they are anti-racist and they can hold their heads up high. And I genuinely think there are people who cannot tell the difference between being somebody who isn't a racist and somebody who is a so-called anti-racist who looks a certain fashion. It can be difficult to tell, especially in this day and age where we reward people for looking a certain way rather than being a certain way.
Just very quickly, very finally, Catherine, before I get shouted at, I suppose at the very core of this is whether or not children's education is being negatively impacted as a result of people crowbarring in woke stuff. Is it?
it's not that they're crowbarring it in. It's that our whole culture is changing gradually over time, where we can't even see that it's changed. And we don't realize that when we're narrating things, we're narrating them differently than the way that we would have done 20 years ago, because the Overton window, it's moved about how we see things. So that road sign you keep referring to, many people will say, well, obviously we should change it. And they don't realize that 20 years ago it would have been a mad thing to do, because our culture is...
Indeed. And look, I share with you, although you're much more at the thick end of it, as it were, but the future when it comes to people growing up with this just insidious element that we've got at the moment, and what then actually breeds, some would say, essentially indoctrination, although none of it where you are, that's for sure. Catherine Burbalsing there, founder and headmistress of Michaela Community School. Now, speaking of wokery, someone within the government fighting against it, supposedly anyway, is the Home Secretary. And this is something that we're going to be diving into now, because Suella Braverman has ordered a review into politically correct presentation on gender-based language. So the seminar, which was held during work hours, told attendees to not call each other mate or use the words homosexual and transsexual. I mean, my homosexual mate would be absolutely livid about that. But the event also urged civil servants to wear rainbow-coloured lanyards and include personal pronouns in their email signatures. To discuss this, I am joined by political commentator, pronouns, I believe, she, her, Emma Webb. Emma, thank you very much. And is it nice to see someone in government finally rallying against this?
It is. I think many people will be very happy to see that she's talking tough on this. But again, as has been the case with things like migration, there are lots of politicians who are willing to talk tough, but not very many who are willing to actually take real steps to change these things. I think that Suella Braverman really does have the political will. I think she really does want to try and purge all of this nonsense from the Home Office. And part of the reason for that, of course, is because it's actually hampering their ability to do their job. They're wasting literally thousands of hours on these sorts of workshops talking about how to avoid things like micro incivilities and how to be a straight ally. Which, of course, is very ironic because, as you just said, they're talking about censoring the word homosexual, which, frankly, is, of all of the things, the most egregious aspect of this, because that is actually quite regressive, if anything.
Well, I would argue it absolutely is. And I would also be a little bit more tolerant of whatever you'd call it, woke language, if it didn't change every 2 seconds. So you're immediately out of date. And then before you know it, you've deeply offended someone using exactly what they said about themselves 2 minutes ago. And I can't keep up. I do fear, by the way, for elderly people in this country who tread a daily minefield of wokedom if they're in a workplace. And I think there's no mystery, is it, as to why a lot of them maybe don't want to go into the workforce. But Emma, I can't help but wonder whether or not the big losers in all of this are women. Yet again, I mean, I am pleased to be talking to a real-life woman about this. I made a bit of a mistake before my break where I was debating what was going on at the Brit Awards with 2 men, which probably wasn't a great look, so I'll hold my hands up to that again now on national television, so the Twitter hate can stop. But on this, talking about gendered language, etc., are we just pandering to a percentage of the English and Wales population, the non-binary brigade, who are about 0.06% of our population? Is this what's happening?
Of course we are, but I think it's also pandering to a lot of people who like to think of themselves as representing other people, and sometimes representing people that they might not even know, people who are offended on behalf of others for exactly the same reason as Catherine Burbalsing was saying there, that, they like to feel that, or they sincerely do feel that they are good people because they're doing this, because they think that they're representing people who are victimized. But actually, you can see how this is backfiring, because going back to the word homosexual, that also ties in with what you were saying about the way that women are getting the short end of the stick here, because what they're doing is they're actually erasing sex, they're erasing sexuality here. And as I said, that is regressive. That has an impact on women's rights. There's been a whole debate this week about the Gender Recognition Act in Scotland. And again, very correct for the government to take a stand against this. So I think things are actually moving in the right direction within government on this. But they said in this training course, apparently, that homosexuality was a medical term. I mean, that really is taking us back to the 1950s. And so you can see how many people who are homosexual or women would feel that this is a real threat to their rights. But of course, there are some people who think that they're doing it in the name of kindness.
Yeah, this is it. And
inclusivity.
also, as well, when people do stand up against it, they're made to feel like they're in the minority. But the fact is, there is the silent majority, and it is a whopping great big majority of people out there. I'm utterly convinced of it, but then they get shouted down, normally by someone with pink hair and a very confused outlook on life. Emma, thank you very much. Emma Webb there, who is our political commentator. Fantastic stuff. Right, so the Prime Minister, moving on, Prime Minister says he's not able to wave a magic wand to resolve the bitter disputes over pay among NHS staff. Rishi Sunak said that giving pay rises to striking staff, including ambulance workers and nurses, would lead to money being taken away from elsewhere in the NHS budget. His comments come as ambulance staff belonging to 3 unions. They are GMB, Unison and Unite. They're striking today. It's a dispute over pay and working conditions. Life-threatening calls will be attended to, but other emergencies, such as slips, falls, they might not be. And it comes as freezing temperatures affect many parts of the country. Well, according to a number of staff from the picket lines, ambulance workers are staging these strikes because they are genuinely concerned for public safety. I know this gets a lot of you going, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Feel free to crack on in the inbox. But joining me now, live from a picket line in Rotherham, is Keith Cross, who is a paramedic with Yorkshire and Ambulance Service. Keith, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. You are live on a picket line, ambulance behind you. So talk me through why you're striking. What's going on for you?
We're striking after years and years of just poor investment in the service in general. We've been soldiering through, especially through COVID, and we're now at a point where we can't provide effective care to the British public.
And can I ask, when it comes to some of this, because I get that it's not just about pay, absolutely, it's about conditions, it's about patient safety. I am very confused as to why, when there's ambulances parked up outside A&E with patients in the background, it's not good for you, it's not good for the patients. Why is this the government's fault and not the fault of people who are working in the NHS? Is it not their job to sort it out logistically?
Well, logistics is a very important job in any facility. However, we've always done the utmost we can, and there comes a point where you can only fill a hospital so much before it's full. And we're now at the stage where we can't do it anymore.
OK, so what do you need to see happening in your point of view? You need more money, I'm assuming, and also, what, more hospitals?
Well, we need more capacity in pretty much every area. More hospitals, more wards, more nursing staff, more paramedics, more ancillary staff. At every level of the NHS there needs to be an increase.
OK, all right, and I suppose it would obviously, the argument is that it would cost a huge amount of money to do that, really. Do you think that the vast majority of people on the street would support you in it? I can't help but notice 63% of people apparently supported what you were doing in December. That's down to 52% now. Do you feel as though maybe you're losing public support?
That's not been my personal experience. I've received nothing but very positive support from the public on a day-by-day basis. Everyone seems to appreciate what we do and they understand what we're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, look, by the way, I mean, I've never saved anyone's life. I've never even come close to it. I wouldn't even know where to start. In fact, the last person you would want to see running towards you if you were injured would be myself. I would only ever make it worse. So absolutely massive respect for what you do. But on that note, is it tricky for you to know that right now there will be people who need an ambulance and you're not going to turn up?
Well, the way things have been recently, you could have called an ambulance yesterday and you probably wouldn't have got one either.
OK, so morally, you're absolutely A-OK with what you guys are doing?
Absolutely, yes. We're not doing it because we want to. We're not doing it because we like it. I haven't met a single person in any part of the NHS who wants to go on strike. We're doing it because there are no other alternatives. For years we've been talking to the government about getting some of our issues resolved. There's been nothing, and at the moment there is still nothing.
And Is it frustrating for you to listen to what the opposition, i.e. the Labour Party, is saying, which, as far as I can gather, as I'm sure you're aware, is basically just more talking with you? Absolutely no promises, certainly no promises of the kind of pay rise that you guys are after. Do you think we're staring down the barrel of no one really wanting to go into the medical profession in this country because they feel as though the conditions are so bad?
I think we are now at a stage where, yes, we're not an attractive employer anymore. This isn't a career for the long term because we break people in this job. So we're not attractive. As for what the Labour Party have been saying, it would be advisable, like they've started sort of mentioning, is perhaps there needs to be some sort of royal commission into how the NHS is dealt with and how we go on in the future in the long run.
Can I just ask you, look, I've got to ask this, all right? I'm going to swerve the pay question because I think, you know, I'm minded to ask it, but I won't ask you what you earn. That is a personal question, but in light of people wanting a pay rise, I suppose it is relevant. But in terms of the way that money is spent in the NHS, now, the NHS is a massive, massive, massive money pit. A lot of money goes into it, and a lot of people don't feel that they necessarily get a lot of bang for their buck. You are right at the coalface in the NHS. Could it not be rejigged? Are there too many people working in the NHS on 100 grand plus who, frankly, you don't know what their job is, and that money could be spent better with people like you?
It's possible. To be fair, I don't work with those people at that level either. As you said yourself, I'm at the coalface. I'm a paramedic on a vehicle. So I certainly don't earn £100,000. What some of those people do within the NHS, I'm sure, is incredibly valuable. We'll include consultants and doctors among that number. However, I think there always needs to be reviews on these sorts of things.
Good stuff. Look, thank you, Keith, by the way. And can I say, really great to talk to you. Enlightening stuff. Look after yourself. Take care.
Thank you.
Keith Cross there, who is live from a picket line in Rotherham. He's a paramedic in Yorkshire Ambulance Service, and I know a lot of you people there don't particularly enjoy the idea of people going on strike, and I am one of them, but I thought that was quite interesting. Anyway, right, loads still to come. Here, don't go anywhere, because there's plenty more in the final hour of this programme. I've massively overrun on time, so I'm just going to throw you over now. Don't go anywhere. I'll see you in a sec.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. It's just gone 5 o'clock. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Here's what I've got coming up for you in the next hour. Conservative Party chairman is fighting for his political life. It comes after the Prime Minister launched an investigation into Nadeem Zahawi's multi-million-pound tax affairs. Mr Zahawi says he has nothing to hide, but the calls for his resignation are growing louder, with Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner demanding answers to the affair. Well, Angela's on the case. Great. Anyway, we'll bring you the very latest. Also this hour, is it fair to suggest that a majority of Brits have a something-for-nothing mindset? I'm asking this because a new report suggests more than half of households in the UK receive more money from the government than they pay in tax. Is it a legacy of lockdown? Is it to do with an ageing population? What's it all to do with? Are Brits on the take? And a council in London has spent more than £100,000 changing a street name because of racial connotations, which, as far as we can tell, didn't actually exist. Black Boy Lane is now La Rosa Lane. And in case you didn't know, the new name there, they've still kept the old name in brackets so it can still offend people with eyes who look at it. We'll be discussing all of this very, very shortly. I mean, it's absolutely hilarious up from top to bottom. You don't want to miss it. But as ever, get in touch with your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I want to know a couple of things. Do you think too many people in this country are on the take? Is that unfair? Do you think a lot of people aren't? And also, as well, should they be changing names of streets? For example, Black Boy Lane. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now to headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story on GB News today: the Prime Minister has asked his independent ethics advisor to investigate the Tory party chair's tax affairs. Nadeem Zahawi has welcomed the investigation, saying he's confident he acted properly throughout. The former Chancellor has admitted he paid a penalty to HMRC following an error over shares in the polling company YouGov, which he co-founded. He hasn't disclosed the size of the settlement, which is believed to be almost £5 million. Rishi Sunak says clearly there are questions that need answering.
Well, these things are dealt with by an independent advisor who will fully investigate this matter and provide advice to me as Prime Minister on Nadeem Zahawi's compliance with the ministerial code. That's the right approach, it's the professional approach, and that's how we'll restore integrity and accountability into government overall, is by making sure that when situations like this arise, we deal with them promptly, we deal with them professionally, and that's what we're doing in this case.
Well, Labour's Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, told the Prime Minister to take some accountability.
If this isn't a breach of the ministerial code, surely the code itself is wrong, Mr. Speaker, and it's the Prime Minister's job to fix it. How can the Prime Minister claim to deliver the integrity, professionalism and accountability that he promised while his Conservative Party chair still sits in his cabinet?
Meanwhile, the process of appointing BBC Chairman Richard Sharp is to be reviewed by the Commissioner of Public Appointments. That comes after Mr Sharp asked for a scrutiny panel to examine potential conflicts of interest following claims he was involved in securing a loan of up to £800,000 for Boris Johnson. He insists he didn't make a loan or arrange any financing and only made an introduction to a guarantor. Now, as you've been hearing, thousands of ambulance workers are striking for the third time in 5 weeks today. Unison and GMB union members across England and Wales have walked out, along with staff at 2 hospital trusts in Liverpool. Further industrial action is planned in the coming weeks by nurses and other NHS workers. Union leaders are calling for fair pay, accusing the government of not wanting to find a resolution. National officer at Unite Union One Kasab told GB News this isn't just about pay, it's about saving the NHS.
Not just a matter of the ambulances queuing up outside. It's about what's going on in the hospital as well. It's about not being able to discharge people quickly enough, and it's about not having enough staff to be able to deal with those patients. So it's not just one person in the hospital's responsibility. If you want to find one person whose responsibility it is, then it is Rishi Sunak. It is an abdication of leadership. He now needs to take charge.
Households with smart meters could receive discounts if they cut their energy use for the next hour. After successful trials, National Grid has launched its demand flexibility scheme, running right now and up until 6 o'clock. 26 suppliers are signed up to the initiative, which involves paying businesses and households to turn off appliances for an hour or two. The electricity system says it'll run the scheme again tomorrow afternoon after the first live run today. And the energy regulator is launching a review of the checks and balances companies use to place customers on prepayment meters. Ofgem's threatening legal action if they don't take due care in the process. The chief executive, Jonathan Brearley, says the number of people forced onto prepayment meters is extremely high, and vulnerable customers shouldn't be left in the dark and cold during winter.
From April, households on median disposable income will spend 10% of that on their energy bills, and those relying on the state pension will spend 29%. That is a truly extraordinary part of our household budgets. And even with the energy price guarantee and energy bills discount scheme, I know that the scale of the challenge for many people out there remains enormous.
Well, in other news today, an Afghan asylum seeker has been found guilty of murdering a 21-year-old in a row over an e-scooter. Lawangin Abdulrahimzai stabbed Thomas Roberts twice during an argument in Bournemouth in March last year. After the verdict, the jury was told the asylum seeker had been convicted of murder in Serbia and had been sentenced to 20 years in prison in his absence. Now, dozens of firefighters are tackling a blaze still in Edinburgh today. Scottish Fire and Rescue saying they were called to the Jenners building around 11:30 this morning. 10 fire trucks attending. No casualties reported. Some streets surrounding the former department store in the city have been cordoned off. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now more from Patrick.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Now, a Cabinet Office minister has told MPs that the Prime Minister would have had full disclosure regarding the interests of Nadhim Zahawi, as outlined when he appointed him chairman of the Conservative Party. This is, of course, in relation to Zahawi being in rather hot water over his tax affairs. Rishi Sunak ordered an independent investigation into the tax affairs of Mr Zahawi earlier today, as he faces increasing pressure to just clean up his cabinet, as some would say. Basically, Labour want him sacked. And this, of course, is the exhaust fumes of the old Boris Johnson administration. Grilling the government this afternoon, the Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, said that what's emerged about Mr Zahawi was so absurd that people must have assumed it would never happen.
Is there no system in place to prevent a person being actively investigated for unpaid tax being appointed to run the UK's tax system? Maybe it's that absurd, Mr Speaker, that no one would ever think it would happen. While we understand the confidentiality of the honours process, surely where there's a serving minister is blocked, there is an overwhelming case for sounding the alarm.
Well, now Angela's on the case. Oh, anyway, let's get some more analysis from our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's been in Westminster all day for us. There we go. Darren, right, so we have a couple of things to talk about. Let's just deal with the Zahawi stuff first. Look, the government are palming this off, aren't they? They're saying leave it to the independent inquiry, and surely that's due process. Keir Starmer, former head of the CPS, he should know it's innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, indeed, but the problem is, I think, Patrick, of all this, is that Nadhim Zahawi has already admitted that he has made mistakes. In that statement issued on Saturday, he said that the error, which led, we think, to him paying back £5 million to HMRC, to His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, part of that £5 million being a penalty fine for not being open and transparent with his tax affairs, that he accepted the error that he made was careless and not deliberate. Now, the reason he's used that term is it's a legal term that is accepted by HMRC. So in many ways, he has admitted he's made a mistake. I think the question politically, if you like, in all of this is twofold. A, that he's not been open and transparent about that, because for years he's been saying that his tax affairs were all sorted. That clearly was not the case, and we know that now, and that included actually a tax lawyer who faced a barrage of legal letters when he started looking into this, trying to dissuade him from doing so. And second of all, it seems that this arrangement, this careless, not deliberate arrangement with HMRC was sorted out when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, when effectively he was in charge of His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. So that is why he's under pressure today, though in saying that, you're right, he would say that when he became Chancellor, he wanted to get it sorted. It was better than putting it off. That's the reason he did it last summer. And also, he would say that he's going to cooperate with this investigation. We'll have to wait and see what Downing Street's ethics advisor has to say. As for the Prime Minister, he's got wrapped up in all of this, of course, because, yes, while he didn't appoint him as Chancellor, that was down to Boris Johnson, he did make him the chairman of the Conservative Party, and there will be continued questions about precisely the Prime Minister knew and when. But ultimately, Patrick, all this is done today, this announcement, as is inevitable in politics, is it's kind of kicked the can down the road, and these questions will continue to rumble on.
Yeah, it has kicked the can down the road. Difficult situation for Rishi Sunak politically, both internally and externally, actually. So we'll have to wait and see what he does there. But I just want to move on from this Zahawi tax stuff, frankly, mainly because I'm a little bit bored of it now. But also within the last few minutes, Andrew Bridgen has apologised to the Commons for, quotes, all my breaches of the Code of Conduct. Apparently, I'm reading this now for the first time, Darren. What's going on there?
So again, politics is never straightforward. It's pretty complex stuff some of the time. And with Andrew Bridgen, there are two train tracks, if you like. Let me deal with train track number one. Train track number one is that Andrew Bridgen was suspended from Parliament for 5 days last week after a long-running investigation by the parliamentary authorities into essentially lobbying and the fact that he'd not been open and transparent about some of the paid advocacy that he had been provided with in Parliament, as I say, with certain companies and potential questions he may well have asked in Parliament and indeed of ministers. Now, he was found to have broken the rules, and that is why he was suspended from Parliament for 5 days, and that's what he's apologising for, because this is his first day back. Now, we also have to remember he's been suspended from the Conservative Party as well. Now, that was around his kind of Twitter tweets that he's been sending out over the last couple of weeks, and I've just checked his Twitter. They have not stopped around vaccines, but not specifically just on that. It was when he made a link with the Holocaust, suggesting that some of what had gone on was equivocal to that in terms of kind of the crime that he thought had been committed. That's why he remains suspended from the Conservative Party, but he's back in Parliament as an MP, and that related to his lobbying activities, and that's what he was apologising for this afternoon.
OK, well, interesting stuff, Darren. Thank you very much, as ever. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor. He's in Westminster for us. I want to move on now and talk about a new study that came out today, and it's got a lot of you in the inbox, quite hot under the collar. I'll go to that inbox in just a second now, because this new study has found that the number of households who receive more in benefits and state help than they pay in tax, or generate really, has reached a record high. So the analysis from the think tank Civitas shows that over half of households get more from the government than they contribute. I think it was Kennedy, wasn't it? Asked not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, something like that. I've never been great at paraphrasing people, but there you go. Or indeed quoting them directly, as it turns out. But yes, are we now in a situation where a lot of people are on the take? That's one interpretation of that report, isn't it? And it's certainly something I've been asking you. Anita's been on. Patrick, most definitely. Some don't want to work because of handouts. We've got David, who's taken a more direct approach. We are a nation of fat and lazy people. So there you go. David, I've asked you not to talk about me in a public setting, but there we go. Look, some MPs have put rapid rise in dependency down to COVID handouts. They say that it's affecting the psychology. So when we were all in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and you unless Boris Johnson or Chris Whitty told you to put your pants on, you'd have been strolling around naked, wouldn't you? We had to be told how to do everything all the time. We needed someone, Big Brother, watching over us the whole time. They've said that's affected us psychologically, and people have begun to assume that the state will just prop them up. OK, but is this a fair assessment? And how can Britain shake this high dependency level? Lots to unpick here, as ever, and joining me here to do it is the wonderful, it's Devon Galani. He's the Director of Policy in Practice, and he's been heavily involved with universal credit since its inception, written extensively on welfare policy, government spending, etc. Right, OK, let's just deal with the rather simplistic, but I would say overbearing question initially, which have we become a nation of people on the take? Is it too easy now to stick your hand out and expect the government to pay for it?
Well, it might be a bit too easy to avoid paying £5 million in tax, just reflecting on your...
Down the back of the couch, mate. It's down the back of the couch.
Yeah, well, just reflecting a little bit on what DWP does for people who make careless mistakes with their benefits. It's a lot more serious than I think what Nadine, let's see where he ends up.
We'll have to wait for the results of an independent, notoriously litigious Nadine Zahawi.
Sure, okay.
Might have a thing or two to say about that.
So it's just interesting, the DWP approach to this as opposed to the HMRC approach to this, which seems to be a bit more reasonable, I guess.
Understood. Is it too easy for people to sit back, not do a lot, and earn not a huge amount less than if they went out and went to work every day?
I think the drivers of more people, depending on the state, are just very evident. We've got an older population, we've got a sicker population, we've got more people out of work. If you are in work, if you're fit and able to work, we've got a very low unemployment rate. So most people who are able to are working, and they're working pretty hard. We've had a few big shifts in policy that have pushed the dependency ratio up. So we've got the tax-free allowance, so more people can keep more of their earnings as they move into work, which I think everyone would say is a good thing. So the drivers of this increasing dependency ratio are pretty well known. The question is, what do we as a nation do about it? The biggest thing we can do is grow our way out of that, which I'm sure you'll come on to.
Well, yes, and I'm rather glad you brought that up, because did we not have a Prime Minister who wanted to grow our way out of things? And now we're just back to square one, aren't we?
She did say she wanted to, but what kind of impact did she have on that? The impacts that she had were to massively increase the cost of living for everyone, which I guess is the other big driver here. So if you want us to tackle this problem, reducing living costs is the one thing you could do. Besides growing the economy, reducing living costs is the fairest way to redistribute who gets what out.
I get that. Now, my concern with this is that we have created a nation of people who are psychologically dependent on the state. And this would appear to suggest now that people are. They can't think for themselves.
Do you really think that's true? If you look at kind of the unemployment rate that we're seeing in this country being the lowest, it was the lowest going into COVID.
I would argue what my concern would be the younger generations coming up, and I speak for a lot of people my own age in this, and I do feel, this is anecdotal, but I do feel as though a lot of people do expect a lot to be done for them, and maybe having an income is one of those things.
I employ quite a lot of young people. They work pretty hard for me.
I'm sure they do.
That's probably because I make them. But I think you do have a few more people sticking around in education. You can see that in the statistics. You do have a few more people leaving the labour force early because of their fears over COVID. We've got those statistics. They're quite well documented. But the bigger, longer-term drivers here are all long-term. They're all ageing population. We are getting sicker. And there was if you look at the Civitas report, which this is based on, dependency ratio came down because of austerity in the short term. The real question here, and I'd love your take on this, has that pushed the dependency ratio up in the longer term? Because we are getting sicker as a result. We've just had, I think the half hour before was all about A&E crises going into the pandemic. We could have been better prepared. So, sometimes you can make decisions that in the short term feel like they're really good decisions, austerity, spending less money on the state. But actually, if people need that in order for them to progress, learn more, be healthier, be fitter, be able to contribute more in the economy, which is what the modern economy is based on, are we cutting off our nose to spite our face?
I completely understand that side of it, and clearly a sick nation is a nation with fewer people in work, and I understand all of that. In the bigger picture setting, I suppose, is it a dangerous thing as a society to have more people than ever dependent on the state?
It is dangerous. It is going to affect a lot of Western economies in this position. Even China's in this position because of the one-child policy. I think if you've kind of been following the international news, there's more older people than there are. The workforce is shrinking relative to older people. That for the first time ever in China. That's happening here. It's happening across the Western world. The question is, what do you do about it? And just before we went live, we were having a quick conversation here about immigration. That's one of the possible solutions to the fact that we've got a workforce shortage. Now, I know that isn't always the most popular, particularly given the Brexit vote. People kind of, I guess, felt very strongly about that. But that is definitely one of the policy solutions to bringing people in who are able to grow the economy, contribute, and aren't going to take much out of it.
My concern with reading this report was, well, actually, what is Britain gaining at the moment? Is the argument of mass immigration doing a lot to help our economy, and that's why, therefore, it's a great thing? Has that gone pop by virtue of this report? Because if you're looking at around 54% of people, something like that, it says 53% of people, who are taking more out of the state than they are putting into it, that 53%, surely, one would assume, includes maybe people who have, say, just arrived and who are operating at the lowest end of our economic spectrum, as a lot of new immigrants who come by virtue of wanting to make a better life for themselves will start towards the lower end to work their way up. Surely that's a lot of them.
Well, possibly. It will almost certainly include far more older people, far more sick people who have been here for some time and gotten sick. So I think when you kind of, if that's the problem, there are far bigger problems.
There are other areas
to solve and to tackle.
Look,
as you say, they can be a part of the solution as well.
Look, 100%. Look, thank you very, very much. We could quite literally talk about this. I suspect it will not be the last time that we talk about this. And thank you very much for coming into the studio as well. Really appreciate it. Right, that was, of course, the wonderful Devon Galani, who's Director of Policy in Practice. Right, now, we're moving on from that, ladies and gentlemen, because a plan to pay more than 1 million households. It's more than 1 million households and businesses to cut energy from 5 p.m. till 6 p.m. Well, hang on a minute, what time is it now? So it's 21 minutes past 5. So don't turn off your electricity if it means the TV, OK? This evening, it's been branded a gimmick. It's been branded a gimmick, with experts claiming that it's a way to penalise those without smart meters. So the National Grid will activate its demand flexibility service for an hour this evening. It's happening right now. If you're at home or you're on your way home, apparently you might be able to earn a few quid if you turn the lecky off. So 26 energy suppliers, such as EDF, British Gas, E.ON, Octopus Energy, they're participating in this scheme. Families are set to receive 10 quid and 20 quid to cut their usage in order to prevent blackouts on one of the coldest days of the year. So I decided I'm a bit skint at the minute. We've just had Christmas, we've got my birthday, I was lucky enough to go on holiday, spent loads of money on loads of food and stuff like that on holiday. So I managed to hook myself into the GBNews electricity system, and I thought I could earn myself 20 quid. And there we go. Good stuff. So GBNews told me that if we keep the lights on, that it's coming out of my paycheck, right? I'm not having it, so as you can see, everything's gone off. Everything's gone off. You yourself, back on. Perfectly timed. There we go. Now, speak to me about this is energy commentator. It's Jamie Delaghi. Fantastic. I can see you've got the lights on. You clearly have loads of money and don't need 20 quid.
Yeah, and not only that, it's mild over here. It's about 10 degrees. So we don't probably have the same pressures that you might have with certainly arising from, we have different pressures, but they're not arising from cold weather anyway.
No, OK, all right. Well, look, is this just a cheap little gimmick? I mean, people right now at home will be turning things off, hoping that they get 20 quid in the post. Does it work like that?
Well, I think it's an excellent scheme. You're helping others to help yourself. What's not to like? Let's run a few numbers. If 1 million people do this, right? Start cutting back, not cutting off all electricity. That would be a bit insane. And anyway, you're not going to save a lot by switching out the lights. But say they save 1 kilowatt. So that's 1 million kilowatts. That's a gigawatt. Now, demand, when I last looked at it, is something around the order of 45 gigawatts. So you're shaving about 2% off demand if all that 1 million people do as I've suggested. So that's making a reasonable difference. They'll get rewarded for it. I don't even know exactly the rate they're going to get paid. I've seen some figures, but I don't know the exact number. But, you know, it's going to help ensure that
look, Jamie, why are we really doing this? Does Britain, seriously, you know, one of the biggest and best countries economically in the world, need Doreen from number 42 to turn the oven off now so that we don't all have a blackout? Is that realistically where we are?
Well, yeah, I don't want to be sort of nerdy about this, but it's not exactly that. What they're trying to do is keep sufficient headroom so there's something else happens, you know, some huge generator trips, then that avoids the light going out if demand is cut. So what you're doing is keeping that buffer there, keeping that keeping that headroom there. So if Doreen decides to keep her electricity on, no, it's not going to lead to blackout. Probably not. Anyway,
I don't know your personal situation, of course, but the advice has been, well, if you can avoid using the oven and the washing machine, then you quit in. I mean, that's music to my ears, because it means I get to have a takeaway and I don't have to do the cooking for the missus. I'll just wear the same shirt tomorrow. I always do. Anyway, look, James, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show, James Delagi there, who is an energy commentator, just reacting to the fact that, well, if you want to stop Britain going into blackout, you just turn your oven off, basically. Anyway, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Plenty more still to come, including the latest on these ambulance strikes. So don't go anywhere, because I will be back in a tick. I'm A.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
All right, people, we've got the lights back on now. So the Prime Minister says that he's not able to wave a magic wand to resolve the bitter dispute over pay among NHS staff. Rishi Sunak said that giving pay rises to striking staff, including ambulance workers and nurses, would lead to money being taken away from elsewhere in the NHS budget. OK? His comments come as ambulance staff belonging to three unions, GMB, Unison and Unite, are striking today in a dispute over pay and working conditions. Life-threatening calls will be attended to, but other emergencies, so slips, falls, they might not. And it comes as, well, more people are slipping and falling, aren't they, in these freezing temperatures that happen every single year. According to a number of staff from the picket lines, ambulance workers are staging these strikes because they say they're genuinely concerned for public safety. Joining me in the studio is Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnson. Lucy, thank you very much. Call me a cynic, but do you think that some of these unions are seeing that the inflation rates are about to plummet and they want to try to maximise their leverage at the moment?
I think they have been, well, they've been sort of trying to start talks and talking about it since May, and because we had a sort of caretaker government then, they couldn't really get anywhere with it. I think they know that the government does appear to not have a very good hand at the moment. The polls showing that they've still got quite a lot of support with the public. But, you know, ultimately, it's, you know, the money should have to come from the Treasury, and if it's got to come from the NHS, yes, patients will have to come.
Well, is the government onto something here? Now, hear me out on this, because basically what they've said is if we decide that we're going to pay you more and potentially increase the workforce, so the number of paramedics. Now, that money has to come from somewhere. That money has to come from somewhere that's already in the NHS. Actually, is this an opportunity to clean out, strip out all that dead wood in the NHS at the minute? All these people, the diversity managers, or your people, or directors of lived experience, or these people on 100, 200 grand a year and no one has any idea what they do.
I'm not sure how much money the diversity managers, actually contribute, how much they take to the out of the general pot. But it is true that consultants and a lot of doctors I talk to are getting really fed up with the top-down approach from government. Less so. I mean, if you look at the managers per person, it's not actually that much compared to most industries. But what they are concerned about is the fact that government seems to have a lot of diktats about what they need to do. And actually, individual regions should be making more decisions. But you're right, if we have a pay rise for this group or for nurses, for example, that will affect the whole of that band. So we'll also have to have a rise for physiotherapists, occupational therapists. They will automatically also get a rise. So it's a lot of money.
Do you think that, given that the pay structure for pretty much anyone working in the NHS, certainly paramedics, nurses, etc., is freely available online, I refuse to believe, as sympathetic as I am for the very difficult job they do, I refuse to believe that anyone can be that blind walking into it, that it must be so much worse than what you originally thought. Do you suspect there are a lot of people now on strike who, frankly, just regret their career choice?
I know a lot of people are regretting the fact that they've gone into a job that they thought they could help people and they can't do the job they wanted to. And a lot of nurses are really fed up with the amount of paperwork they have to do and documentation and form filling. They can't see the patients. It ends up being healthcare assistants doing the work that they wanted to do. They can't care. So I think the NHS in general is not allowing people to do the job of caring.
Would paying to see a GP, for example, help anything in the NHS? What was it, 10 quid, 20 quid or something like that to see a GP? I mean, is that a thing that might work?
It's a policy that comes up every now and again, doesn't it? And it's a bit of a non-starter, I think, because you'd have to have complicated opt-out schemes. I think with prescriptions, for example, you've got about 80%, over 80% of people who don't have to pay. You need to work out how to means test it. What do you do if they don't pay? Do you chase them? You need a whole bureaucratic arm to set it up in all, layers and layers of it. So I'm not sure that would be a fix. And if you do that to GPs, then what do you do to the rest? You make the system even more complicated, which is already complicated.
I can see a situation where we end up it costing us more to chase people who've not paid a GP fee or whatever than it did to actually just miss the appointment. But Lucy, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show. Covering a range of NHS-related issues there. That is the Health and Social Affairs editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnson. Right, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Plenty more still to come. In the final half hour of this programme, get a load of this, people. When you hear the details of this, it will make you laugh and probably cry a bit as well. This is the London Council that spent more than 100 grand on changing a street name that pretty much nobody considered to be racially offensive. They still left the name, the original offensive name, on that street sign. They had numerous public consultations that nobody turned up to, apart from one chap who said he didn't agree with it. And it's all absolute, utter madness. Anyway, I'll be back after you headlines.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories on GB News. The Prime Minister has asked his independent ethics advisor to investigate the Tory party chair's tax affairs. Nadeem Zahawi has welcomed the investigation, saying he's confident he acted properly throughout. The former Chancellor, though, has admitted he paid a penalty to HMRC following an error over shares in the polling company YouGov, which he co-founded. He hasn't disclosed the size of the settlement, which is believed to be almost £5 million. Rishi Sunak says clearly there are questions that need answering.
Well, these things are dealt with by an independent advisor who will fully investigate this matter and provide advice to me as Prime Minister on Nadeem Zahawi's compliance with the ministerial code. That's the right approach, it's the professional approach, and that's how we'll restore integrity and accountability into government overall, is by making sure that when situations like this arise, we deal with them promptly, we deal with them professionally, and that's what we're doing in this case.
The process of appointing BBC chairman Richard Sharp is to be reviewed by the Commissioner of Public Appointments. Mr Shawcross said the review would ensure the process had been run in compliance with government rules. Richard Sharp has asked for a scrutiny panel to look at potential conflicts of interest over his links with Boris Johnson. It follows reports he was involved in securing a loan of up to £800,000 for the then Prime Minister, which Mr Sharp denies. And thousands of ambulance workers are striking for the third time in 5 weeks. Unison and GMB union members across England and Wales have walked out, along with staff at 2 hospital trusts in Liverpool. Union leaders are calling for fair pay, accusing the government of not wanting to find a resolution. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the action is hugely disappointing and warned patients of disruption. And for the next half hour, well, 25 minutes, households across the UK with smart meters could receive discounts if they cut their energy use. 26 suppliers are signed up to National Grid's Demand Flexibility Scheme, which involves paying businesses and households to turn off appliances for an hour. The electricity system says it'll run the scheme again tomorrow afternoon after the first live run today. Those are the headlines on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News and we're back in just a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride. Oh, she's on it today! Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Yes, as you can see on your screens there, if you're watching us on the telly, a little bit of breaking news for you, because the Ministry of Defence has confirmed that Sunday was the busiest day of crossings in 2023. 442 people crossed the English Channel in 10 small boats. And immigration enforcement officers have carried out more than 1,100 raids on suspected immigration offenders after Prime Minister Rishi Sunak pledged to get far tougher on illegal migrants. Since the 11th of December, 1,152 raids to identify those suspected of working illegally in the UK have taken place. This marks a 10% rise in enforcement activity over the previous 5-week period. As ever, lots to get stuck into, and here to do it all is GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, shall we start with the small boats crossings? Records.
Yes, we had word yesterday, actually, of about 380 that we'd known had crossed, but now, clearly, the official figures, it took them a while to get out, but they put them out late this afternoon, 442 people who crossed in 10 small boats. Now, it is really down to the weather that we haven't seen significant numbers crossing really since the beginning of the year. We had 44 people who crossed in pretty bad conditions in one day on the 2nd of January. Then last Tuesday, after quite a long pause, 106 crossed in 2 small boats. But again, the weather is just preventing these criminal gangs from putting the boats out from the coastline in France. It abated enough yesterday to allow those crossings to take place, but still wasn't the best of conditions. And they pushed off from a huge stretch of coastline from Dunkirk right down well south of Boulogne to a place called Brec, 80 miles of coastline. And of course, you've got the French authorities now with the extra money vowing to crack down on those getting off the coast in France. But it's really difficult for them, to be fair to them for once, because 80 miles of coastline, you would need tens of thousands of officers to effectively stop and properly patrol that length of coastline. So they're going to keep coming, Patrick. And yesterday, that tiny break in the weather, it's a bit worse today, so no crossings today. But tomorrow, we're told that there'll be much calmer conditions again in the Channel. And this will be the only day for actually more than a week or more of really bad weather in the Channel. So expect a very significant number to probably try and cross tomorrow.
No, OK, well, it's an interesting warning. I actually have just got back from France, and I, for one, was desperately happy to leave what is undoubtedly a war-torn country. You mentioned as well here some things that we're raiding more people's houses, trying to crack down on people who are working here illegally. Is that right?
Yeah, well, last Friday, we were given exclusive access to go out with an immigration enforcement team as they raided a number of businesses in southeast London. It's part of a crackdown. I mean, they're there operating every day anyway across the country, looking for those who are living and working illegally in the illegal economy here, costing the country, of course, billions of pounds, because these people are not, and it's believed that it could be anything up to 1.5 million people working and living here illegally, doing that job and not paying any taxes, so not contributing to the country.
Well, they're taking the cash out of the country a lot of the time as well, yeah.
That's exactly what they're doing, yeah. So these immigration enforcement raids have been taking place, but they've stepped up the number of raids that have been taking place since Rishi Sunak announced on the 11th of December this crackdown against illegal immigration and illegal working here in the UK. So they're ramping up, we're told, these operations, an extra 200 immigration enforcement officers. In addition, an extra 700 border force officers are going down to Kent and particularly around Dover for the end of this month, when border force again resumes overall control of the migrant boat situation. There will be a small boats operational command. They're taking over that control from the military, who have been running it since April of last year. Quite what will be different, I don't know. They'll probably be a bit more efficient, but are they really stopping the boats coming across, or are they just getting better at intercepting the boats and taking the occupants to Kent?
Well, it's interesting stuff. So basically, I suppose your prediction at the minute is that we will see more of these boats coming across in pretty large numbers, despite the money that we're giving to the French.
Yeah. My prediction is we'll see many more migrants crossing the Channel than we did last year, where it was just shy of 46,000. And the only saving grace for this government will be a month like we've had this month and last month, where the weather is just too bad to get the boats across. Because as soon as the weather improves, these criminal gangs have got a ready supply of people and boats that want to get across here, and they'll push them out. And there's nothing I've seen in the strategy being put forward by the government, which is to be more efficient about the way the operations work in the Channel. Yeah, go after the people smugglers, but it's a lucrative business. Many, many millions of pounds can be made in the space of a really busy week. So you take out one criminal gang, there's plenty other bad wrong-uns that are more than willing to get in and take up this lucrative trade. And they're getting very good at it. You know, they have well-sourced supply chains, getting these boats made to order in China, shipped to Turkey, then up to Germany, where the bits and pieces get assembled once they get to France.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's non-stop as a conveyor belt, isn't it? Look, thank you very much, Mark. As ever, Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor. Whizzing you through initially the fact that there was 442 people entering the UK illegally on Sunday in small boats. Also, making you aware of the amount of raids that have been taking place of people who they believe are working illegally in the UK. That's 1,152 raids to identify people suspected of working illegally in the UK, presumably, of course, trying to clamp down on that whole network of people coming over here and then getting involved in illicit trades, drug dealing, all of that stuff. Anyway, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on a new study that found, I was hooking the show on this actually, done it at the top of each hour, found that the number of households who receive more money in benefits and state help than they pay in tax has reached a record high. So the amount of people basically taking from the state as opposed to paying into it, record high, more than 50% now, supposedly. Bill has been on, who says, please don't blame people who are most in need. It's the government's fault for making the process too easy. They should make people look for work or give them training. Bill, it's an interesting point. I suppose what a lot of people are saying is that actually the line now between being able to, and I'm paraphrasing here, sit around and do nothing, versus earning a decent living, going and paying your way in the workplace is too thin. There should be, some people would say, more of an incentive to get up and go to work. Sally's been on. She says, these figures may have been during COVID, but it's highlighted a bigger problem. There's a reason people still only work 16 hours. They want the help of the government. Sally, there you go. That's your view. Tony says too many people think questioning the benefit system is wrong and being cruel to those who need it, but legitimate questions need asking. I think as well, Tony, to be fair, it's not just about the benefit system. It's easy to stigmatise people, and it's wrong to stigmatise people who are on benefits. As we had, I think she was called Linda, bless her, who was on earlier. She's on disability benefits. She said it was incredibly difficult to get on those benefits. She worked for as long as she physically could. And there's no doubt there's hundreds of thousands, probably millions of people, definitely millions of people, to whom that applies to. I think what stood out for me is, are there people who, you know, maybe decided, OK, well, I can get this amount of benefits if I don't work, and they've decided that they want to try to take advantage of that. The government is saying it's almost like long COVID. It's a psychological effect of people who now realise they can get, quotes, something for nothing. What do you make of that? GB Views at gbnews.uk. But we're moving on, people. Now, this story, in some respects, is laughable. In other respects, it's definitely not. This is an example of where political correctness wins. I would argue, as we're also about to find out, that there wasn't necessarily a massive public clamour to do this, but we'll get stuck into it. A controversial street name in the London borough of Haringey has been renamed after the council believed it had, quotes, racial connotations. So the road was called Black Boy Lane. You can see a picture of it there on your screens. It's now called La Rose Lane, although it does rather handily, in case anyone is desperate to be offended, still have formerly known as Black Boy Lane, like the artist Prince, in a way, on this road now. Anyway, Black Boy Lane will now be known as La Rose Lane. After the local London legend and black publisher John La Rose, Haringey Council began its consultation into the planned name change after a Black Lives Matter protest. Now, there's a lot more to this. I'm joined by Ken Hines, the chair of Haringey Independent Stop and Search Monitoring Group. Thank you very much for joining us. And GB News presenter and former Haringey resident, Emily Carver. I will start with you, Ken. Now, I understand you're quite happy this road has been changed. Is that right? Why?
Absolutely, because I'd much prefer to see a road that means something than a road that is meaningless. Right. And my simple fact is, who better than have someone like John La Rose that represents the local community for the work that he's done tirelessly to actually embolden people like myself to become the very best I can be.
Did you, just out of interest, right, did you happen to walk past Black Boy Lane and think that's racist?
I live close to Black Boy Lane. And, you know, I got an uncomfortable feeling, to tell you the honest truth.
Really? Yeah, go on.
Because, as I said, it's got a way, like, you know, psychologically, it kind of puts me down. You know, that's what I honestly believe.
Okay.
Because, and I felt to say, why would they who come up with that kind of idea? Because surely you could have come up with something a bit smarter than Black Boy Lane. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, and I'm glad that they're changing it, but I don't see why they still have the word formally, because, again...
Well, it's still on the sign.
It's still on the sign.
Right?
And you've got a black man who's talented that you're calling after, but then you're calling him Black Boy Lane.
I think there's layers to this, Ken, as you've rightly identified, because there is the argument, I suppose, was it... a lot of the things, when you see things like Black Boy Pub or whatever, it's often a hark back to, I think it was King Charles II, I believe, or also chimney sweeps and things like that. It's not always to do with racial connotations. Emily, you're going to shed a bit more light on this. Emily Carver, GB News' very own presenter here, because there is quite a bit of, I would argue, lunacy to this.
It's quite funny what Ken said there, because it does seem like they've come up with the most offensive solution to everyone. So people who were originally offended by the name will be still offended because formerly Black Boy Lane is there on the sign still, and those who are offended with it changing will be offended. But what's quite interesting is that when they consulted the residents of the road, 36 residents and businesses responded to the survey, responded to the consultation. 81% of them didn't want the name to change, and that included 100% of the black residents, of which there were 3 that responded. So it seems to me that this was just a drive, a politically correct drive from Haringey Council after Sadiq Khan launched his commission on diversity of the public realm, which focused on statues and monuments. It was just a way for them to virtue signal, and at great cost to the taxpayer. And it's so amusing looking at the minutes for all of these consultations that they had. They had 3 consultations. They didn't get the answer they wanted initially, so it seems as if they have then broadened out the scope of the consultation to include members of the ward, residents of the ward, then residents of the rest of Haringey, then even residents outside of Haringey, to which there were still only 726 respondents. So it really is just crazy that the sign was changed.
When you look at it in that way, I know that you said it made you feel a bit uneasy. Fair enough. There clearly wasn't huge, massive public clamour to change this. It did cost, what was it,
86,000 estimation.
It's quite a lot of money, that, for the local taxpayer. Do you think they care? Should they have done it bearing that in mind?
I don't know why they did the consultation. Just go ahead and goddamn change it. You know what I mean? I mean, they're much simpler, because that's what you want to do anyway. And the simple fact is, I think going forward, you need to just, when you put in names of new roads down, think about what you're doing and make it meaningful, because there's a lot of good talent that goes unanswered, you know, regarding legacy. And I think it's important. I'm hoping they'll name a road after me.
Well, it's only a matter of
May I just say, they did change the local recreation park to another name because it was associated with someone who I think was involved in the slave trade or whatsoever. And now the new target is Rhodes Avenue Primary School in Muswell Hill, which is again in Haringey Council. I don't think that one will stand a chance.
OK, can I ask, do you think a lot of this, Ken, is maybe white people virtue signalling for not a lot of reason?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Well, in terms of, I suspect that clearly no % of people who were black who lived on that road had a problem with it, right? They didn't want it changed. I can't help but wonder whether or not there's a lot of people out there who feel as though they have to be seen to be actively doing something when there isn't a huge amount of clamour to it.
Well, I disagree, because first of all, there's not a lot of houses on that road, but there's a lot of houses leading off that road with a lot of black people that lives there. So I'm telling you, and my personal thing is, and I know there's a few activists who were living in the surrounding area that would have been offended and would have thought it's a nice gesture to have somebody who they can identify with,
but Ken,
and be uplifting.
One black woman who responded to the survey, who lives on the road, she said, "I do not approve of the name change. As a black woman, I find nothing offensive about Black Boy Lane. I'm not ashamed of the word black. I'm proud of it. I'd rather Haringey Council spent its time and money addressing the real issues in our borough, such as antisocial behaviour, knife crime, etc., etc." Isn't that the common sense view?
Well, no. She's probably one that won't even come out in a Black Lives Matter demonstration. So, you know, so what does that mean? You know what I mean? Maybe, she needs to be looked on and talked about, and really go back into our history to saying, listen, we need to put together on this.
All right.
Let's do it. Let's do the best thing, the positive thing.
Both of you, thank you very much. I was stuck right in the middle of that then. There we go. That was Ken Hines, Chair of Haringey Independent Stop and Search Monitoring Group, and GB News' presenter and former Haringey resident Emily Carver. Good stuff, that, I think. And now I've got to read very quickly this. The local authority said many other residents shared the concerns about the racial connotations of the name and the impact its continued use has on black people in Haringey. That's a statement from the local council. Right, that's out of the way now. Up next is Jubes & Co. And she's here in the studio. Hey, there we go. What you got coming up?
Hello, Patrick. Yes, are we a something-for-nothing generation? According to the front page of the Daily Mail, we are. Is it right, though, or not? Some people saying, stop picking on people that need to claim benefits. I want to get into that one tonight. Also, MPs, or quite frankly, anyone wanting to get into public office, do you think they should have to make their tax returns public? Of course, this stems from the Nadeem Zahawi row about his tax bill. Also, energy, obviously cash incentives now to reduce energy during peak times. Is that the future? And two-tier NHS, is that where we're heading?
Fantastic stuff, Michelle. Well, it's going to be a rip-roaring show. Michelle Jubilee there will be with you for the next hour. Thank you very much, everybody who's been getting in touch throughout the course of this show. This is my first show back after a week away. I feel re-energised and reinvigorated, ready to do it all again tomorrow at 3 p.m. 3 until 6 tomorrow, you'll be able to catch me. My goodness grief, I mean, anything could have happened by then. Will Zahawi will have gone, maybe not, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. All right, we'll see you all tomorrow. But first, of course, it is the weather. Don't go anywhere because Jubes & Co. is next.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office. We keep the north-south split tonight with much of the north cloudy and relatively mild, clear, cold and frosty again across the south. But again, there will be some thick fog patches under this area of high pressure. Low pressure systems to the north. Weather fronts not producing much in the way of rain. But with the winds coming in from the west, it is much milder here in the south with the clear skies. The frost coming back pretty quickly this evening. The blue taking hold of the chart. Not quite so clear, though, for the East Anglian coast and down across Kent. There'll be more cloud and even the odd shower here. A little bit of patchy rain for western Scotland and the west of Northern Ireland too, but most places dry. The cloud making a big difference to those temperatures above freezing across the north, well below further south. And there will be some dense fog patches as well. Just be aware of that first thing in the morning in this zone from Lincolnshire down to southwest to England. That is the zone with the frost as well, but it will melt away during Tuesday morning. A cloudy day for parts of East Anglia and the southeast. Feeling cold here, whereas we'll have milder conditions with a lot of cloud further north, but some brighter skies across Aberdeenshire could see temperatures getting close to 13 degrees. Further south will struggle to get much above 4 or 5, so a cold day here. And if the fog sticks, we may not get much above freezing. And speaking of freezing, temperatures drop back down below during Tuesday evening, where we keep these clearer skies across the south. Again, some fog thickening, but a bit of a shift further north. A weather front bringing some rain across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Nothing too heavy, but that weather front will bring thicker cloud and rain and drizzle into northern England, parts of Wales during Wednesday. Further south, again, some early fog and frost. Generally just a cloudy, cold day here. It will turn brighter further north, but as the winds switch direction, it will turn a little cooler here, whereas slowly temperatures just starting to rise across parts of the south later this week. Bye for now.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dupes & Co, the show where we'll get into the things that have got you talking today. I'm wondering, are we a something-for-nothing nation? That's the headlines today. Apparently, more than half of us take more from the state than what we put in. Does that matter? Are we a bunch of scroungers, or is it a little bit more complicated than that? And when it comes to transparency, particularly when it comes to things like taxes, how much privacy do you think those in the public